Welcome, everyone. I'm Robert Moore, and I'll be your instructor today and your collaborator in thinking about these topics. And as I said, I'm a little foolish to try to do what we're going to do today, but what the hell, you know? Let's just have some fun and stir the pot here and be in the presence of two great minds who, a lot of people depreciate both of them today. You know, the fads change in the world. And I was thinking driving up here what I was going to say to you about, about all the ambivalence that exists today around figures like Jung and Eliade and Tillich and a number of others. And I just wanted to say to you, in my opinion, in the 25th century, people on a quest will still be studying those people. And a lot of the people that are supposedly in the fads today intellectually are considered to be superior to them will be forgotten. So this is a study. Studying these people is not easy. Studying Jung is not easy, as you know. Studying Tillich is not easy. But the beauty of this and what brings us together today is that some things. In some great minds, if you put the energy in to try to mine them and realize it's difficult, mining the ore that is there, they reward you. And the beauty of it is, as you study them more, as many of you indicated in your comments, you spiral around and get deeper and deeper in your understanding. And everything you learn helps you go back and pick up what you already read and come to it at a deeper level. And so let's make no doubt about it. Probably most of us in this room are going to be studying Jung and Tillich and those other people who are in their of their stature the rest of our lives. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's as it should be. A lot of people come to me and ask me, well, who should I study? And I know how busy you are. And so my sense is you really don't want to waste a lot of time studying small minds. It's not that small minds are not precious, but what we're concerned about is how to survive as best we can and how to thrive if we can, and how to, we Jungians like to think about individuate, become as whole as we can be. Tillich would say to find the joy we can find, and so the effort is worth it today. Let's just look at it as another dipping into the well, and working together on trying to understand these great minds think and what it's got to do with our existential struggle. So let me go over. Let me just say, as a biographical thing for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Jungian psychoanalyst, and I never get bored with thinking about Jungian analysis in relationship to all kinds of things. I practice in Hyde Park and love practicing analysis. And I also teach. I've always loved to teach. That's why I'm here today. I taught this week, but I love to teach things that are wonderful. So I'm the senior professor in a center called the Center for Theology, Ethics, and the Human Sciences in Hyde Park at the Chicago Theological Seminary. And I have the privilege of teaching advanced doctoral seminars on these topics. And so I get to work on this Let me just say this, though, today. In that context, I spent a lot of time talking about the specifically theological aspects, specifically Christian theological aspects of Tillich's work, and the ethics, the ethics, Tillich's ethics. I'll say something about that today. But what I wanted to emphasize today is Tillich's stature as a philosopher of the human. That is, you don't need to be a Christian or even a believer in any tradition in order to have Tillich grab you and make you face what it means to be a human and the struggle of being a human and the challenge of being transformed. So I really want to just say at the outset that I believe that Carl Jung's psychology is the once and future psychology. You know, I'm not a Jung. I like to say here at the Institute, I'm not a Jungian analyst because I don't know anything else. My first book was a Freudian book. My first psychoanalytic diploma was an Adlerian psychoanalytic diploma. And my partner, Margaret Shanahan, and I, another psychoanalyst, we continue to study other schools of thought in great depth. But we believe that the Jungian point of view is the most adequate to the complexity and depth of being human beings. And while we value other schools, we really feel that this is the right place psychologically. And in terms of Tillich's philosophy, I'm contemplating one day in my spare time, having a conference on Tillich's thought for the 21st century, because I really believe in a way that Jung is a 21st century thinker. Tillich's philosophy has few peers in terms of a resource for struggling to be human in this world. So this is my proposal to you. Before the break this morning, I'm going to go very fast. That's why I wanted to deal with Tillich while you were fresh. You just had your coffee. This morning, I'm going to just introduce the basic framework of Tillich's, get this, ontology. That is his philosophy of being and non-being. Because you've got to get that or you won't get Courage to Be. It's the foundations that are assumed in the book, The Courage to Be. Then I'm going to, after the break, I'm going to focus on his understanding of the struggle for transformation and fulfillment. The fulfillment and wholeness is possible for human beings. Because like Jung, he understands that there are limitations. It's only when we're really in our grandiosity, which is a lot of the time, that we don't want to deal with limits. So after the break, I'll deal with his understanding of the struggle to be a human being and the transformative dynamics that are involved in that. Then we'll take a break for lunch, and then we'll come back, and I will just context parallel Jung and Jungians, neo-Jungian. I'm not a classical Jungian. I'll explain that briefly. Jungian and neo-Jungian perspectives on the transformative struggle in dialogue with Tillich, because there are many, many parallels. Looking at the issue of complexes, looking at the issue of archetypal dimensions. We have to understand the struggle to separate from archetypes, because they possess us and destroy our human life. They're not all good. We've got to get over a romance of archetypes. They're wonderful, but you got to relate to them carefully. And we'll be dealing with that right after lunch. And then, after the afternoon break, we will look at the role of spirituality in this process from both Jung and Tillich. Because for both of them, you're not going to make it if you don't plug in to transpersonal resources that are beyond your ego. They are both in fundamental agreement with this. So in other words, we have to understand the limits of secular culture and secular therapy. We have to appreciate it, but we have to understand limits so that we know what else we've got to do in order to have a fighting chance for our life. So that's what I propose, if that's all right with you. Okay. Well, let's jump in here. I'm not going to spend much time at all on Tillich's personal biography. I want to recommend this book, Paul Tillich, His Life and Thought, by Pauck, P-A-U-C-K. It's Wilhelm and Marion Pauck. And it is a fairly thorough study, and also would suggest that you look at the book that Rollo May wrote after Tillich's death called Paulus, P-A-U-L-U-S, which is a frank assessment of Tillich's contribution and his flaws and his personality and his, as our Jewish friends say, mishigas. I like to talk about dragon bites that we all have. The dragon has bitten all of us in some ways, some of us more severely than others. Well, Tillich and Jung both had substantial dragon bites on them, and it shows. And what we have to understand that great geniuses usually do. And we have to be very careful that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater when we try to clean up and moralize about great geniuses, because you will lose a lot of gold when you throw out the dross. But Tillich lived, in a time very, very much paralleling Jung's life. Tillich was born in 1886, small village in beautiful part of Germany, and died in 1965 in Hyde Park. And if you ever want to have a little outing, get away from Dodge, get out of Dodge, and drive down into some more rural areas, Tillich's interred, his ashes, I believe, are in New Harmony, Indiana, down in that sacred space down there on the banks of the river, where those utopian communities, a succession of utopian communities existed over time on the banks of a river there. And it's a shrine. Thomas Merton's ashes are there too. Thomas Merton's there. And it's a very sacred place if you want to make a little pilgrimage. So let me jump in now. Tillich lost his mother very early. He was a very young child. That was a big factor in the relationship. Lee Roloff, one of our analysts here, often says there's always me-search in the research. Well, if you lose your mother very early, it makes you realize things are shaky. Later wrote a book called The Shaking of the Foundations. Well, it starts with the loss of his mother. Then as he grew up in this beautiful Germany, the Germany of Goethe, and these great philosophers and cultural theorists, that is an enormous flowering of the high culture. We today look at Germany through the lens of the Holocaust, and it's right to be serious about the Holocaust, but it's wrong to not learn about the enormous shining of German philosophy and cultural studies. And Tillich grew up in this great environment, beautiful, and as a young man, he had both a PhD in philosophy and a PhD in theology, and he was intending to teach in both fields if he could. As a young man, he was ordained into a German evangelical church. And at the time of the First World War, he became a chaplain in the trenches in the German army. And that experience is behind a lot of what we'll talk about today, because add that to his death of his mother. And he found himself in the mud and the blood as a very young man, burying a lot of his friends who had been killed, machine gunned, killed in artillery bombardments. And so this philosophy is rooted in the horror of World War I. And if you're not familiar with the horror of World War I, you need to do some historical study. It was when Western civilization really had an encounter with its shadow, the first major encounter with its own shadow. And it was horrific beyond words. Entire generations of young people were wiped out. So anyway, this philosophy has its roots in horrible suffering. And so one of the things we'll say about Tillich, he's not going to overestimate your possibilities. And it's because, and you got to understand that today in our world, there's a lot of people living in manic defense, in denial. They like to fly up above all the manure and try to forget about it. In the New Age culture, there's a lot of that. Well, evil doesn't really exist, if it's all in your mind, so forth, so on. You create it. And try to tell that to somebody in the trench in France during the First World War when your high technology enemy is raining artillery shells down on your position. It'd be hard for you to imagine that because you thought wrong, that you created those artillery shells. So anyway, the first thing we want to deal with here is the philosophy of being. Now, this is a huge area of study, the philosophy of being. And today in the academic world, they don't like to talk about ontology. In my view, a lot of small minds have decided that ontology is if you talk about ontology, you're trying to control and dominate everybody. Well, there's no doubt that your theory of reality can be used in a shadow way, a demonic way, to oppress and destroy other people. People do it all the time. We could take turns in telling examples of that. So there's no question about that. But Tillich would say, look, he is going to do an existential philosophy. Now, what is an existential philosophy? Well, among other things, it starts with the fundamentals of human experience, what all human beings must engage and encounter, no matter what their culture, no matter what their religion, no matter what their gender, no matter what their race, no matter what their social class. Things that are fundamental to the experience of being human. And so when Tillich is speaking of what it means to be a philosopher, we must realize, first of all, that he is an existentialist philosopher. And what does that mean? He's impatient with abstractions for the sake of abstraction. Now, a lot of people that don't understand Tillich, which is a lot of people today, people that taught me Tillich when I was a young man didn't understand Tillich. And really, I had a lot to get over in terms of unlearn about what I was taught in graduate school. But anyway, they like to think of him as needless abstraction. And they also like to view Tillich as somebody who was basically fundamentally a secularist who had no sense of spirituality, but was simply talking about religious things in order to keep his job at Union Theological Seminary after he had to leave Germany when he was run out by the Nazis. So there are a lot of negative assumptions about Tillich. But what you have to understand, that an existentialist philosopher is analyzing the experience of being human, carefully analyzing the experience of being human. And so Tillich, you can see him in the line. You've got Kierkegaard. I mean, you got to study. If you want to understand the roots, you've got the major roots. Nietzsche, philosophy of life. That is the struggle of life and creativity against the forces of repression and suppression. And so you've got Kierkegaard, who criticized all of those philosophers in Europe who were so abstract and lived way up here and didn't really focus on the struggle of individual human beings. And then you have Heidegger. Remind me to comment more on Heidegger if I have some time. But Heidegger, the idea, and this is fundamental to this first part about being. This philosophy of Tillich goes from, you take it through Heidegger back all the way to the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers Parmenides. And the fundamental question, and if you don't get this, there's no way you can get a sense for the way Tillich looks at the world. It says, Parmenides said, why is there something rather than nothing? In other words, the first thing we notice here is that all of you appear. All of you manifest. How do I know it? There you are. You stand out of what the Buddhists would call the void. Suddenly you appear. You manifest. That's the roots of phenomenology. What is it that appears? See. Well, and then you can work on all that issue about, well, is it an illusion or not? But fundamentally, something appears. Heidegger picked that up. If you want to understand Heidegger's philosophy, which is really fascinating, maybe I should do another thing on Heidegger and Jung. But Heidegger really pointed to that, and he pointed to the way in which people in their thinking, they miss the most miraculous thing. And that, he said, something gives. Something gives. And it's like, I like to put it, there is a primordial fountain of being. It just keeps flowing. You can also look at the philosophy of Whitehead. It's just pouring forth. Creativity pours forth. And if you look all around you and you have eyes to see and you're not depressed, key caveat, if you're not depressed, you're going to be filled with wonder. Wow. Look at all this pouring forth around me. Now, we won't talk about drug experience, but those people who have imbibed in psychotropic drugs tell me that it enhances their sense of the flow of this primordial fountain. And so they'll find they did a piece on one of the programs on TV the other night, and they were showing some guy that was stoned, and he was looking at something. He had found a nail head in the wall or something, and he was just marveling at that. Well, if as Blake says, if the doors of perception are cleaned, or cleansed, so you can see the flow of the fountain of being, you're filled with wonderment. And so the first place you start with this philosophy of being, whether it's Heidegger or Tillich, who was more positive. Heidegger could get in very nihilistic places, and his thought was picked up by Nazis. Heidegger and Nietzsche kind of were co-opted by the Nazis. Tillich picks up on that fountain of being thing, and is not nihilistic. He seeks to keep that idea and get you to focus on that. That's the first thing you got to focus on. Because if you can focus on this incredible richness of the fountain of being in you and around you, then you have awareness of the power of being. Now, what does that matter? It matters a lot, because there is not just being in Tillich's thought. There is also non-being, which is, I like to put it when I'm teaching students this stuff, I like to say, you got to get a sense for how malignant non-being is. Non-being is not passive. You can say that there's this mystery about non-being. It's very aggressive, like a very aggressive cancer. And it attacks being everywhere. You know, the Hindus they saw this, and they would come up with gods or goddesses that represented that reality. The gods or goddesses of non-being, who attack being, who were the gods and goddesses of destruction. So anyway, one of the things you want to do today is ask a very existential question. Well, we've already got two fundamental existential questions. How aware are you, practically speaking, of the power of being all around you and in you? And secondly, how aware are you of the power and presence of non-being in your world, in your personality and life? Because if you want to deal with Tillich where he believes we have to work, then you have to deal with your life existentially. Don't make this just theory. There's nothing more practical than Tillich's thought in this way. So, how are you aware or not aware of the power of being, the fountain? And how are you in denial or giving too much power to the reality of non-being here? The existential reality of the presence of non-being. If you get that, if you go away with that, that will be worth your day if you really work on that. Because getting this stuff conscious is what a philosopher helps you do, and what a good analyst will help you do. Okay. All right, so you got those fundamental, the ongoing struggle between the power, the creative power of being and its manifestations in all the forms. And then you've got a huge malignant presence of non-being. Tillich in his thought likes to say that, and I want you to think about this in the context already, just to anticipate our discussions of Jung, but Tillich thinks that at the level of essence, that is you might even say, intentionality of being, the richness and power and fullness of being in its primal state, we can imagine this. We can imagine that we should be more than we are. When you're experiencing the feeling that you should be more than you are intuiting the dimension of the idea of essence. The essence that is related to the fullness that's in the primordial power of being. In other words, you're not wrong in your intuition. There is something real that is leading you to intuit, gosh, I should be more than this, or I should be better than this, or I should be more whole than this, or I should have more energy than this, or I should have more strength than this, I should have more courage than this, I should have more love than this, I should have more peace than this, I should have more joy than this. What Tillich says is that this helps us understand the philosophical and existential reality between all of those theories of the fall, the fallenness of humans' experience. Why did those theories of the fall come up? Or all of those spiritual traditions that talk about, that lift up the brokenness, the illusoriness of human life, all of these sort of nihilistic philosophies and spiritualities. See, what is going on there? Tillich would say that we have that sense that something is not right. Remind me this afternoon in talking about psychotherapy, and you therapists, this is important for us to get at what anxieties are neurotic, are related to psychopathology, and can be dealt with through psychotherapeutic techniques, and the kinds of anxiety and feelings of estrangement that are not neurotic, that cannot be fixed, that are ontological, and will always be with you. This is where the study of this kind of stuff is so important, because there are a lot of therapists that think they ought to be able to heal the human condition. And if the client or analyzand has not gotten over X, it's just because they were a bad analyzand or I was a bad therapist, depending on what day it is. If you look at it through Tillich's eyes, one of the important things to realize is what kinds of anxiety can be fixed and what kinds of anxiety must be understood. And then what does one do at that point? And there's where your spirituality issue comes in. See? So we'll come back to that after lunch. But anyway, so there's a fantasy and a theory in Tillich of this experience that we have as human beings of fullness, what Jungians would call the pleroma. Jungians will talk about that sense of fullness that's in the archetypal realm. In your archetypal self, as I will go into after lunch, that thing in you that's the archetypal self, it speaks fullness. It understands fullness. It likes fullness. It doesn't like your brokenness. It doesn't like your complexes and your shortcomings too much. And so you got to understand there's something in you that we'll get into this afternoon that's psychologically connected to that. If you put your psychology hat on or your philosophy hat on, the psychology hat will say, well, this is archetypal. And then there's our ego. And what is the experience of my ego? Well, it isn't pleroma. I don't know about you. But, we do have those manic states occasionally. And we do get into our grandiose exhibitionistic libido once in a while. And we feel like we're really in the primordial pleroma until reality hits. Right. So anyway, so there is a sense of this intuition humans have of an essence that is more than what we experience most of the time. All right. But Tillich doesn't stop there. He gives us an analysis of what he believes to be the structures in being that you can notice anywhere being manifest. And these things are called the ontological polarities. Now, you can see here where we're going to go this afternoon with the Jungian thought, right? Polarities, that ring a bell? Opposites, integrating the opposites. Well, Tillich has a theory of the polarities that are going to be present wherever you are, whether it's in your business, whether it's in your physical functioning, whether it's in your psychological functioning, whether it's in your organizational functioning, whether it's in your educational functioning. These are going to exist. And Tillich is bold. And if you look at this carefully, you can see why he's bold. Because he says, look, this is cross-cultural. There are a lot of people in the academic world today that says, nothing applies to everyone. Well, I invite them to show me how Tillich's wrong about this. They can't do it. Okay, what are the polarities? First is the primordial polarity of human experience, and that is the experience of self and world together. Whenever you open your eyes as a human being, there's a world. There's never a time when you're human from the very beginning that there's not a world. As an infant, it may be the body of the mother, but there's a world. And as we'll see this afternoon, when human beings, when we talk about developing human development, there's got to be some sense of differentiation from the world. You've got to differentiate from it so you're not merged, fused, we say in family therapy. Undifferentiated ego mass. You got to come out of that undifferentiated ego mass, which is you're being merged with the world and your family, in the form of your family, your siblings, so on. And the struggle to be a self is always in tension with the way the world presents itself to you. There are no exceptions. There are no humans that do not have a challenge of differentiating from a merger with world, with things, with objects, with people, but who also have to figure out how to maintain contact with the world. Some people solve this by trying to leave the world, whether it's in a spiritual tradition or in a psychosis. They're trying to leave the world, or catatonia. And so that's the primal polarity, self-world. But this gets more differentiated. There is these three other fundamental polarities that you want to think about, and think about in terms of psychological functioning and all sorts of other things that present themselves. There's the polarity of destiny, and there's the polarity of freedom. First. Now, when Tillich is talking about this, he is not using the word destiny like we might say, gosh, I hope I achieve my destiny. That is not the way he's using the word. When Tillich uses the word destiny as one pole of your existence, this has to do with the givenness of your life that you don't have any control over. You know, you were born in a certain point in history, into a certain family, into a certain social class, into a certain race, etc. And the destiny pole has to do with all of those things which you can't control. You may be grandiose enough to think that you can control it, but the reality is you cannot control those things. A lot of people put a lot of energy into trying to pretend it doesn't exist. But Tillich is lifting up. There is a destiny pole Whitehead deals with this in terms of what he calls causal efficacy. That is, there are realities that happen to your family that have impacted you. Things that happen to your grandparents, family therapists say, things that happen to your grandparents affect you and you don't even know unless you've had the genogram done. You don't even have a clue that the tragedies of your grandparents have put a huge stamp on your life. But this would be an example of what Tillich would be talking about as the destiny pole. And so if you're going to do careful awareness work, either philosophically or analytically, you got to ask, what is this destiny pole in my life? In psychoanalysis, what do they call that? That is a genetic analysis. That is the genetic aspects of analysis. You got to ask, well, what happened to me to get me here? And how was it stuff that was beyond, those things that were beyond my control, that left me with a particular set of complexes I've got? But there's also the freedom pole, which is no matter what your destiny, there's always freedom of your response to this, as long as you're human. Now, it is possible for trauma to destroy your humanity. And there are many of them. You can think about the types of trauma that can destroy your humanity. Tillich goes into that a lot. What he calls the structures of destruction attack your humanity. And one of the things you want to ask if you're doing a Tillichian analysis of your life, say, okay, where are the structures of destruction in my life that are trying to destroy my humanity? And one of the key things about destroying your humanity that he'd be talking about is taking away your sense of freedom. What is depression? A lot of it is losing your sense of freedom. If you have a sense of freedom, you will not be as depressed. To the extent that you have a sense of your freedom, your depression will let up. It's related to the whole philosophy of despair. What is despair? Despair comes on when you get the idea, you come to the idea that is gone. And then you just want to exit your humanity. Despair is a rejection of your humanness. And so to the extent that you as a person experience despair, and if you haven't got a good language for despair, study Kierkegaard, Sickness unto Death. But it's when you just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. There's nothing I can do. Okay. So there's one tension, always present. An aware person, philosophically aware, according to Tillich, will be very clear about pole of destiny. Because not to be clear about it is to have a fantasy of being God, which we would call today grandiosity. I've got a manuscript that's almost ready to go to press called Facing the Dragon of Personal and Spiritual Grandiosity. Grandiosity tries to tell you there is no destiny pole. And it will say, I have unlimited freedom. But despair will try to tell you it's all destiny. I have no freedom. See it? Okay. Polarity number 2. I'll try to finish these and then we'll take a break. Polarity number 2, form and dynamics. Form and dynamics. You can think about this as structure and energy, or energy flow, movement. According to Tillich, any expression of being, no matter where it is, whether it's at the subatomic level or in human experience, or in historical process, sociological, social process, political process, at any level of being, there's always powerful presence of form. Being comes in forms. And at the other side of the polarity, being always has dynamics. It always has energy. There's enormous scientific evidence for that. I mean, anywhere you have reality, you're going to have energy flow. There's going to be some kind of presence of energy in some form. Doesn't mean it's released, but it's there. So, notice we got a splitting here. This, in psychology, we talk about splitting. Well, we can talk about splitting philosophically too. The phenomenon of splitting, which you don't want. You want to minimize splitting in your life. But what is a split? Well, if you split into overemphasizing form, you're probably going to be quite a lot on the compulsive side. You're going to be what the Adlerians call a controller. You privilege form in your life, see? Or we think about bureaucracies. Some of you have experienced bureaucracies. Some of you lucky people have not had to deal with bureaucracies too much. But if you have dealt with bureaucracies, either in business or government or religion or whatever, you know what the privileging of form is. Form without meaning. Yeah. Rigidity in all its forms. Social rigidity, religious rigidity, racial, class, all those kinds of rigidities are on that end. The dynamic pole, this is all about your transformative process. The energies of transformation, movement, change. Some people will associate that with chaos, and or you get structure and transformation. What I'm here to say to you today is that all transformation has both structure and dynamics. And one of the questions you want to ask is, how are you relating to form in your life? How do you get along with form? Are you like me? Are you oppressed by form? A lot? Chronically? I've spent a fortune on psychotherapy trying to help me get less dominated by form in my personality. I'm a little better. Okay. Or are you a person who is dominated by dynamics? Is your life full of chaos? Do you have a hard time finding a paper bag that would collect the different parts of your life? The word we say, she just can't get it together. Or he just can't get it together. That person is privileging dynamics in their life. If you get into adding too many, this is related to one of the comments we had, and it's a constant problem for humans. We say it in business management. One of the most important things is managing change. Managing change. If you don't, in an institution or in a personality or in a culture, if you don't manage the rate and flow of change, you're going to be inviting either stasis or chaos. And so those people who privilege freedom too much, notice they all relate to each other. If you privilege freedom too much, you're going to assume that you can just have unlimited change in X amount of time, and it's always going to be good. Well, any therapist knows better than that. At least they should. If they don't know better than that, then they got a lot to learn as a therapist. Because you sometimes, a therapist, if they're good, they will try to slow you down. Say, no, let's don't deal with that this week. Let's put it on the agenda. Let's just don't deal with that this week. You got 14 things on your plate right now. You know, if we're going to enhance your transformation, then we've got to prioritize and figure out which one of these things we ought to work on first. Does that make sense? Okay. So that dynamics and form, you got to ask yourself, how am I doing in my life with regard to form? How am I doing in my life with regard to dynamics? If I were to get more optimum, I love to think about optimum. This is optimum, trying to optimize, trying to reconnect with this in a flow, as Csikszentmihalyi calls it. So, if I were to optimize, would I be putting more energy into form, or would I be pouring more energy into getting more dynamic? Because you can't have it both ways. It's in your personality, from a philosophical point of view, from Tillich's point of view. We look at you, we can tell which of these polarities you're privileging too much. One of the graduate courses I teach at the graduate school, we take all of the forms of psychopathology in the DSM-4, and we analyze them on these polarities. And it's stunning when you do that. It's very clear. Okay, the last one, participation and individualization. Does that sound familiar to you Jungians? Read that individuation in Jung. Okay. There is always participation. You are always grounded in a matrix of some kind, a systemic matrix. That systemic matrix is part of your destiny, and it has a form. And it's important to get more and more aware about how you're relating to it. It's easy to lose yourself in your participation. Does that sound familiar to those of you that have worked on codependency, either with yourself or with somebody else? Does that sound familiar? This is an existential philosophy of codependency. It's everywhere. Everyone, not just those people in 12-step programs that some people like to look down on. Tillich says this is fundamental ontology. We all struggle with codependency at the ontological level because we need to participate. If you don't participate, you will get into massive anxiety. Massive anxiety. If you start feeling yourself disconnected, in fact, if you got a lot of anxiety now, you're feeling disconnected. On the one hand. All right. But then there's another kind of anxiety that comes from pressing this individualization pole. Wait a minute. I thought individuation was always good. Well, this is where we'd like to have Carl Jung and Paul Tillich sit down and talk. Tillich would learn something, and Jung would learn something. Jungians will tend to privilege this pole, and they will tend to call that the collective in a depreciatory way. Not just Jungians. The whole roots of psychoanalysis had a fantasy about autonomy, about how autonomy is the goal. until recently in psychoanalysis when we've learned a little bit more wisdom. That is, if you push people into that in an excessive way, they get crazy. They don't get better. They get crazy. Because when you move into too much autonomy, you start disconnecting from people. You start having what we call self-object failures. We'll get into that more after lunch. That is, your anxiety then will start peaking, not because you are flooded with the fear of going back into mother or going back into your family or going back into your culture of origins. Your anxiety in this case will be caused because you're fearing you're losing your ground in social reality. And so we get a lot of very, very high anxiety in human experience from each of these poles. But a particular individual at a particular time, very likely, not always, but very likely is at one pole or the other. And it's very important to know which pole. Because if you don't know which pole, then you don't know what you got to do to balance the opposites. You see that? So it's very important to look and see, do an ontological analysis of what you're experiencing, and you can use a lot of different psychological theories. They all have to deal with this in some way, whether they're family systems or Freudian or Adlerian or whatever. They all have to deal with this ontological polarity, and they all do if you look at it. Okay, so you got this tension. We tend to split as human beings. We tend to split on these polarities. Let's put it this way, the less strong your hold is on being, then you may just oscillate and wobble. If you're a borderline personality, you're not consistently on one pole or the other. So in other words, as we'll see after lunch, loosely organized personalities have their hold on being is so tenuous that they oscillate and wobble back and forth. You follow that? It's important to understand that. And so when you study different types of personality disorder, psychopathology, you will notice that some of them are really on one pole consistently. Others just wobble all over the place. And so we would say, we're going to take a break now, those who are accessing the power of being, and I'll borrow a word from contemporary psychoanalysis that's very important, those who are accessing the power of being in a regulated way will be able to maintain a creative tension between these and move more toward optimizing their human existence. Those who are having a hard time either accessing the power of being at all, or who are accessing it in what Tillich calls a demonic way. That is, your connection to the power of being is killing you. It's not helping you. See? And that's one of the things we'll try to do before the day's out. Understand, think about this if you think about it spiritually. Divine energy, sacred energy, comes from here. All the wise teachers have understood that sacred energies can destroy you if you don't relate to them respectfully. Follow that? And so that's anticipating our discussion about spirituality. What is spirituality about? Two things we'll talk about this afternoon. It's connecting you to this energy, this primordial fountain, one. And secondly, it's keeping you from being destroyed by that primordial energy. And that's some doings. That takes some doing. Think about your life. Think about your struggle. Sometimes you feel disconnected from the energy. Sometimes you got so much energy you can't sleep. Right? Tillich would call that demonic. Yes. Yes, yes, that's what I'm saying. And Tillich's thought is one of the beautiful things. This thought has an architecture. And if you work with it long enough, slowly, patiently, you will start to see the great cathedral, the architectonic of his thought. And these things are together for a reason, because they relate to each other. And these things are together for a reason. They relate to each other. And our job as humans is to try to hold these together in creative tension in an optimizing way so as to get as close as possible to that fulfillment which is our birthright. As humans, the question of how that relates to your divinity is one we won't talk about till this afternoon. But it does relate to your divinity too, your participation in God. Yes, one more and then we'll take a break. Yeah.
Are those groups always together? Meaning, if you talk about personality leaning towards one end or towards the other end,
Yeah.
or when they oscillate.
That's what I'm. Right. Okay. These will always be structured like this. This is ontology. This is the structure of being. Tillich challenges us to say, show me how this is not the structure of being. Show me concrete evidence that this is not the structure of being. It's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do. What we remember, the variable, though, as I said earlier, is individual personalities. Some individual personalities, we'll put it in Jungian terms this afternoon. Some people put destiny in the shadow and they have freedom in the ego. It's a certain kind of personality. Some people have dynamics in the ego and form in the shadow. And so on. You got to think about this, is that, at lunch. But some people hold on human existence is so tenuous because of the power of non-being in their life that they cannot structuralize. They cannot. In other words, what I'm saying is, it's better to be predominantly one form and not all over the place. We have to be clear about that today. If you're all over the place in all these things, sequentially, we have to do something to contain that and connect you better to this in a more creative way. We have to figure out if your problem is because you're not connected to the power of being enough, the chances are that's not it. The chances are, if you're all over the place, you're really connected to the power of being. And you can't handle it. See? In other words, cheer up. If you're really crazy, this one, if you're really crazy, you don't have a problem with being connected to the power of being. That's why I encourage you. Now, if you're like me, kind of a compulsive, you may wonder, am I connected to the power of being? Does that really exist, or is that just an idea? See, now some of you in the room are really plugged into the power of being. And you know the power of being is not just an idea. You're riding that thing. And it's trying to buck you off. You follow me? You get that? You got to feel that. You got to feel it. We'll work on that more this afternoon. Let us reconvene. We don't have much time, and what we want to do now before lunch is to look at some of the key points of Tillich's understanding of the struggle of the individual for selfhood. And let's start out with his understanding of alienation and estrangement in human experience. There's the good news and the bad news, right? The good news is that there is no way at the ontological level in his thought that you can separate yourself from the power of being, really. That is, no matter how much in despair you are, no matter how chaotic you are, no matter what a total mess you are still connected to the fountain. You just may not be able to access it in a useful way, a life-serving way. So the good news is, contrary to what you may feel or think, you're still plugged into the primordial fountain of being, and you have access at the greatest depth to what you need for life. You have access to it in principle. It's there. You may have insufficient awareness, consciousness, to be able to draw on it creatively. And if you become a philosopher, from this point of view, an adequate philosopher will become awake about those things, and it will be reassuring. The bad news, though, is that as a human being, you are always going to have a feeling a lot of the time. You're going to have a feeling, and it's going to tend to lead you to think that you're alienated from it. In other words, the human mind will tend to feel estranged from all of that power of being. Because we experience, we know that we could be better. We know that we could be more loving. We know that we could be more calm. We know that we could have more courage. We know that we could be more just than we are when we're at our most conscious. So that reality in human experience, does that mean if I have the best analyst in the world that I'm still going to experience estrangement? Absolutely. The most, you can have 10 of the best psychoanalysts of all the different schools. Go through all of the wonderful Gestalt experiences and so forth and so on. And you could even go to journal workshops. And as helpful as all of those things would be, you're human, you're going to experience existential estrangement and alienation from your essence. Not all the time, but you will experience that. That's the bad news. And the really dangerous thing, of course, is that if you don't think well, if you're not conscious, if you're not aware, if you don't think well, see, this is about the practical side of philosophical analysis. If you don't think well, you will come to the conclusion that that's the most important thing about you. That is, what we say, you're focusing on it half empty or 2/3 empty. It's not, you don't say to yourself, well, this is coming from somewhere. Even my 3rd glass, or my 4th of a glass, or my 10th of a glass, that's coming from somewhere. As I like to say to people, there must be a pony in there somewhere. If you don't know that story, I'll tell it to you later. But okay, so that's the good news and the bad news. And that is the story of all this. Now let's get it much more detailed. Because you're going to have this ontological feeling of estrangement because you're human. And it's going to be with you a lot. With me, especially first thing in the morning. Right? Or Fridays. I experience existential estrangement a lot on Fridays, waiting for the weekend. But anxiety tends to break, at root, it is all grounded in estrangement, which is grounded in the human condition. All forms. But there are distinctive forms of anxiety that Tillich treats in the courage to be. If you study that carefully, if you keep studying that courage to be, That probably is the single best book to study to begin an entree into Tillich's thought, because it assumes all of this stuff. If you know what we're talking about today, you can go back to that book and read between the lines, and you'll see the ontology, the ontological structure behind what he says. Okay, so first type of anxiety. There are three types of anxiety that anxiety will tend to split into in different people at different times. Now, at root, they're all together. They all go together in estrangement. And if you're really at a terrible place in your life, you may say, yeah, to each one. I know that one, I know that one, I know that one. But others of you will notice as we go through these that you may experience one very powerfully and not experience the others much at all. So let me run through these, and then I'll try to take a question or two on that, and then I'll talk about the forms of courage, and then we'll have a little discussion, and then we'll take our lunch break. I need to talk a little bit about the theory of the self, which is very important too. All right, first, the fate and death. A person experiencing the anxiety of fate and death, you might say they're really thinking a lot about the destiny pole. I'm a human being and I'm going to die. And the fact that I'm a human being and I'm going to die looms so large for me that it sucks the energy out of my life. I'm so aware of death or aging, for those of you that are over 40, just wait till you get over 50. Well, that's right. Wait till you get 60. But gradually, that fate and death reality, that if you're not into your grandiose manic defense, staying up over above all the manure, you're up here. I'm not going to die. It's like, I have an unlimited amount of time to fix my relationships. I have an unlimited amount of time to complete my creative projects, to travel. And but when you're experiencing the anxiety of fate and death, you have seen through that mirage. You do not have an unlimited amount of time. You're a finite creature, and though you participate in the power of being, it is hard for you to tell yourself that helps. If you're really assailed by the anxiety of fate and death, Robert Moore could talk to you about, you're connected to the power of being. And you'd be saying, yeah, but I'm going to die. And so, in other words, that's where you get into despair. If you're having a lot of trouble with despair, which means you can't really, it just all seems so overwhelming that it's almost impossible for me to act or to choose or to try to build a life or try to build a relationship. You follow that? A lot of that may be, in fact, people that are very depressed often are tremendously, at some level, aware of that anxiety, fate, and death. I've wasted my life. Good God, I'm already X age, and I haven't achieved. Think of what Mozart had done by the time he was, and look at what I haven't done. See, that's the way you think when you're assailed by the anxiety of fate and death. Or, I was born a blank, fill in the blank. I was born a blank. And you know what? I never had a chance. Or, you know what? I had this blank health problem. And I never had a chance. Dear friend of mine just has had a very severe stroke. And I know that he's being assailed right now by this. I know he's being assailed by it. Okay. you may have a great sense of meaning. See, you may have that and have a great sense that if you didn't have this, you got plenty of meaning. There's lots that I want to do. So my life is not unmeaningful in the sense of my life, but I'm going to die. So that quashes that. Okay. But emptiness and meaninglessness is a different kind of thing. A lot of the time, it doesn't really focus directly on fate and death at all. When you're experiencing the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness, you just have this sense of what they used to call ennui. Nothing matters. I can't even get excited about my death. I am bored with the idea of my death. I am bored with the idea of my life. There's no energy in it. See, when you're experiencing this anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness, you got a problem on the dynamics pole. You don't have a sense of life fountain energies coming in that makes things fascinating. Think about what we used to say about libido. It's a lot of different things, and I hope to teach a course on psychic energy sometime soon. Because of all these studies, I've gotten renewed interest in psychic energy because it's existentially enormously relevant. And one of the things is libido. One of the things that even the Freudians had a sense for it. If you have libido available, things are interesting. They may be so interesting you can't stand it and have to drink yourself stupid. But if you got libido present, you're interested. You don't have a problem with a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness. You may have a problem with too much meaning, too much fullness. If you're a person that has a tendency toward addiction of any kind, that's more your problem. You know, it's not really so much about fate and death. You've got an overflow of meaning, overflow of all kinds of energies, and then you don't have enough centeredness in the self to contain it, so you have to shut it all down in depression, or contain it through addiction. Okay. So this thing is very flat, very little affect. You don't even get up for being afraid. And if you're really there, this is why a person is really depressed. They're not afraid of death. Sometimes it really looks like a good option. Not that you got enough energy to choose it, right? Because it's kind of hard to commit suicide if you're really assailed by this, because you just can't get the energy to do anything. That's why we say as clinicians, you're not too worried about somebody suiciding if they have that much flatness. What you got to worry about is when they get a little energy. When the energy starts to come back, that will be when they'll try to kill themselves. You follow that? Okay. So that's just a big black hole experiencing the void, and it just sucks the meaning out of life. And so that's a way to understand philosophically a lot of depression, a lot of just really, really powerful depression. Depression that seems to have no object. You know, if the depression has an object, I'm sick, or I'm dying, or there's a major loss that I can't control, it would be more this. But those really, really, really serious depressions, the ones that you don't care if anybody leaves or not. See, you don't care if you die or not. That's this one. And then the third, the anxiety of guilt and condemnation. This one is when you feel so much, you feel your own transgressions, your responsibility for your own transgressions or shortcomings. So in other words, if you feel, for example, I look back in my life and I had such gifts, and what have I done with them? I've been a lousy steward of my life. I had some musical talent, but I quit the lessons, or I was once in this relationship with this wonderful person, but I blew it. See, most of the time we talk about how it was their fault. See, if you can manage to keep talking about how it's all everybody else's fault, then you can lower the amount of guilt and condemnation anxiety you feel. But if you start doing shadow work, as we like to say, you start doing shadow work, and you're not just working on your golden shadow, although that's hard to work on too. I mean, it's hard to work on your golden shadow, but if you're working on that, what Robert Black calls ashes, start eating some ashes about your life. This is where Edinger in that book, Ego and Archetype, he talks about getting down there where you have some humility. And that is necessary to empty that cup of the self so that the great self can put something new in there. But you got to get down there to start acknowledging how you screwed up. Well, it's important, as Edinger says in that book, a wonderful book. If you hadn't read it, read it, Ego and Archetype. I recently gave some lectures that should be available soon on Edinger's Ego and Archetype. But it's one thing to have enough confrontation with the ashes in your life. That's not this. That's liberating from your grandiosity. If you accept your role in the mess you made of your life, that can liberate you from your grandiosity so that you can actually claim that as an initiation and go into a new place with some new energy. But this is when you take, we're always good at taking good things and turning them demonic. Humans specialize in that. We take an important thing and then we exaggerate it and make it serve death. So this is when you're aware of your shortcomings, but you get what Jungians call a negative inflation. And that's when you magnify the negativity in you and in your past and in your past decisions so that they fill the whole screen. And you can't say, but I survived. But I keep trying. Say, I've been divorced and remarried 6 times. Now, if I've really got this guilt and condemnation, I may be thinking, God, I just ought to kill myself. If I had enough self-esteem, I'd kill myself. See? But then I'm worried about what would happen. Maybe there's a moral order in the universe. If I commit suicide, I'm going to have more guilt and condemnation. See? But anyway, if you were taking the forces of life and being against the forces of death and non-being, you'd say, yeah, I've been married 5 times or 6 times, but the power of being in me keeps me trying. I'm still trying to connect. I'm still trying to find a relationship that is more life-giving than death-serving. I'm trying to be more of a life-giver in relationship than a death-server in relationship. And if you've ever worked with people that have had this experience, it's really, I tell you, I'm very touched by the human, this fountain, the way it keeps on flowing. Because the truth is that people try. And that's that courage to be coming in. That's that courage to be coming in. Okay, that gets us to courage. According to Tillich, This has been one of the most important themes in the history of philosophy and religion. And in that Courage to Be book, he gives you this wonderful summary of the history of philosophy on courage. And like you say, you have to read that again and again and just take time with it, and you'll see what he's saying. He says, different philosophers in different periods of the history of philosophy have understood the importance of courage, and they've tried to ground it different ways. And he goes into the ancient philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and the way in which early on courage was seen as a warrior virtue. I was stunned. I looked back and I thought, my God, he knew about this warrior energy long before I did. And in fact, if you take that book and you read the origins of courage in warrior culture, knight and chivalric culture, then that anticipates a lot of things I've said about warrior energy in life and its importance. Because this is the realm of the warrior energy, courage. But anyway, then he goes into the source of courage in Nietzsche and the philosophers of life. Those people that say life is the important thing, forget ethics. All those people that are trying to get you to be good are trying to kill you. That's Nietzschean, see. And you know what? There's some truth in it. There's some truth in it. This is what Tillich means when he says that you've got to really be careful about moralism, because there's a lot of difference between morality and moralism. In moralism, they'll try to shame you for being human, and they'll try to shame you and envy and hate you for all of the life force in your life. And if you don't watch it, they will guilt trip you so much, and they'll try to shame you for your creativity, and they'll hate you for the goodness in you, and they'll tell you they're hating you for the badness. But the key is that they hate you, and they want you dead. And so Nietzsche is not altogether wrong. And Tillich understands that. He says, yes, hear this Nietzsche and the way it went bad among the Nazis, because they kept saying, if you listen to these people that are trying to make you moral, see, that's a Nazi philosophy. If you're really going to be a grown man, you're going to be able to kill your favorite puppy and not feel a thing. That was part of the initiation for the SS troops. And Tillich says, you got to understand it's important to affirm life force, but you must not go the Nazi way. And so if you affirm the life force above everything else, you will tend to become nihilistic. So that was one of his things. The other thing he went into a number of these other things. You should look back at it. But he's talking about the different ways of grounding courage. And he talks about the secular atheistic existentialist and the attempt to ground your courage in your personality and your stand, like Sartre. And Tillich always admires what humans try to do. He's not moralistic. He admires Sartre and Camus, you know. But he's interested in results. He wants you to be able to have courage. And as we'll see this afternoon, he doesn't believe you can ground your courage in your ego. The atheistic existentialists believe that you can just reach in there and get courage right out of your ego, out of your personality. Well, some folks may be able to do that, but it's rare. And in those cases, according to Tillich, even when they can do it, they don't understand where their courage is really coming from. Because for Tillich, that courage isn't coming from the ego. It's coming from there. They just don't know it. Does that mean you can participate in the power of being and not know where it's coming from? Absolutely. All the time. Your vitality comes from the power of being. Does it come whether you know it or not? Yes. So it's a transcendent ground. Your courage always has a transcendent ground whether you know it or not. Tillich says, you gotta get it. Your courage to be is grounded in something much greater than you. And it's very important for you to understand that, or you will be, as Jungians would say, very inflated. And you will be riding for a fall. Because you will get to the point where you will see through your own ego, yeah.
From what you're saying, I'm getting into resonance where Joseph Campbell uses the word consciousness.
Yes.
Would be the same.
Yes. And the importance of consciousness is enormous here today. The whole day is about the importance of consciousness and what you're conscious of. And so Tillich would say that anybody that has courage is getting it from the same place. It's not the ego. It's not the I. Even if you think it's the I, it's not the I. And if you had adequate philosophy, or if you had adequate theology, or if you had adequate spirituality, you would know better. And it would help you avoid the pitfalls that are going to come if you think your courage comes from the I. Is that Tillichian? Absolutely fundamental. Is that Jungian? Absolutely fundamental. That's where they connect. Now let me go into these two different types and I'll just open it up for a few minutes. Two kinds of courage. Equally difficult, but not equally difficult for every person at every time. There is the courage to be as a part, not apart, but the courage to be as a part of a larger whole. And the second form, the courage to be as oneself in tension with the larger whole. Two forms of courage. A centered self, for Tillich, has both. In order to be a centered self, which is for him the goal, a centered self is not one that is more isolated. A centered self is one that has the ability to maintain its sense of selfhood while changing appropriately and creatively and being able to reflect consciously on one's selfhood and the struggles of one's selfhood. So that self-identity, the capacity for self-identity, the capacity for self-alteration, the capacity for self-transcendence. And all of you clinicians and all of you people in analysis, you know that you've got a struggle on your hands of coming to a sense of centeredness and integration. You've got a struggle on your hands to have the courage to change as appropriate and creative. And you've got a struggle on your hands to become conscious. And if you're in analysis, you know how hard it is to become conscious. And if you're a therapist and you're awake, you know how hard it is to be conscious as a therapist. Because the great cloud of not knowing keeps coming back insistently. Okay, so if you're going to be a centered self and be able to do these things, you have to have both kinds of courage. Why is that? Well, think about this as an ontological tension. If you don't have enough participation with others, you will be so anxious you won't be able to individuate. Others, good relationships contain you. They help contain you. They're not enough for spiritual practice. But if you don't want to be crazy, you better be working on optimizing relationships. So, it's not that relationships are against your individuation. They are part of the necessary framework for your individuation. And as you become more centered self, you will learn to love more. You'll be able to love more. And you will want to be in relationship the more centered you get. You'll love the whole world more. In fact, it's amazing. This is a whole philosophy of love. You could say this is an erotic philosophy. Tillich's whole thought, you cannot understand it all if you don't understand the role of eros and the erotic. In fact, if you really get to be a centered self, you are going, you remember that I had ecstasy right up there? You're going to be getting closer and closer to trying to live in the presence of ecstasy and the erotic as much as possible, leading to as much joy as you can have as a human being. How much joy can you have as a human being? From Tillich's point of view, depends on how centered you can get. Because if you can get really centered as a self, you will be able to really have the courage to be as a part, and you'll be able to love. Not perfectly, but you'll be able to love. And you won't be so perfectionistic that you won't be able to take joy in the imperfection. And then the courage to be as oneself. The more centered you are, the more you will see how wonderful you are. You will be able to get past that guilt and condemnation and meaninglessness and emptiness and so forth, and a sense of death. Death will not be able to cancel out the joy you take in your existence. This sounds like Kohut. Sense of as you get more centered in yourself, according to Heinz Kohut. It's not just Jungian, in other words. Great psychoanalysts of different schools see this. Great spiritual masters see this. The more you are realized as a self, the more joy you have. The more vigor, more energy. But energy which is usable. I like to say to my analysans, what is our goal? I want you to be able to rock and roll and regulate. It's one thing to rock and roll and die, or not have the energy to rock and roll. But if this is the kind of a Tillichian vision, what do? What's possible? You can rock and roll and regulate so that you don't let the demonic destroy you. Your participation in the energy kill you. And so one of the things you got to ask yourself today is, which is my temptation? Is my temptation to not have the energy to rock and roll? In which case, I got to really work on my connections to the power of being. Or is my tendency to rock and roll and jump off the cliff? In which case, your problem is not your connection to the power of being. Your problem is learning to not let the creativity destroy the forms of your life. And so, that's Paul Tillich in a nutshell. See? And if you understand this, then you can go back and read The Courage to Be again, and you can see that the huge foundation it's sitting on. It's not just standing out there by itself. That little book is the sort of the peak of the iceberg. Now let me take a few questions and let's go to lunch. Any questions or comments so far? We'll have lots of time this afternoon. Yeah.
I'm wondering about envy and its relationship
Yeah.
to forms of anxiety.
Mm.
And I would pick out number 3, but I'm not sure it's necessarily only number 3.
You mean this one? Yeah. Well, see, one of the things, and we'll get into this more this afternoon, one of the things that Tillich points out, says, why do you need the courage to be? Because there are so many things trying to kill you. And the bad news is that not only are they from the outside, they're also from the inside. But there are forces that serve death and non-being all around you and inside you. And what is the courage to be? It is the actual capacity to take a stand against those things that are trying to kill you, whether they're outer or inner. Now, what's this got to do with envy and hate? There's a huge amount of envy and hate all around. And the bad news is, the better you get, the more of it's going to come at you. See, in other words, we have this nice, naive, as Tillich would say, dreaming innocence. Oh, if I get better, everybody will love me more. Wrong. You get better and you shine, the vampires line up around the block. And the good news about them is they just want to bite. You get really plugged into the power of being, you can feed a lot of vampires and not even bother you. You know, be good to those vampires. They need love too. But then there are those people that are not vampires. They don't want your blood. They just want you dead because they hate you and they don't think they participate in the power of being. That's why it is. A person eaten up with envy and hate, they think they're alienated.
Envy is a question, is a zero-sum game.
Yes.
Either you have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And the people that hate you are suffering from the non-being.
Yes. They sure are. They sure are. They really feel they're privileging non-being. They are telling themselves all sorts of things that they can't be. And they're so preoccupied with what you have that they can't think about what they've got. And the only answer to envy, say if you find yourself envy and hating, and we all do it sometime, you got to say, now, where am I missing how wonderful I am? Because if you're preoccupied with envy and hate, it's about you're missing your own participation in all this wonderful reality. One more question, then we got to take our lunch break.
Could you speak a little bit more about what you were saying about vampires, like when you really start
Yes.
achieving success?
Yes.
You might lose family members or friends.
Well, that's more related to the envy thing. It's like the vampire thing is, look, you got to understand, vampirism is a big psychological reality and spiritual reality. It's not just a myth. I mean, there is a myth, and you can read my friend Gordon Melton's wonderful books on the vampire and so on. But human beings that don't feel connected enough to the power of being assume a kind of vampiric stance toward others. That is, they watch for where energy appears. And instead of hating it, they want it. So I don't want to kill you. I just want you to let me come up and plug in. I want to be real close to you. Now, what you will notice is it will look like, boy, this person really admires me. No, they idealize you. They don't admire you. They idealize you. And they see you as a source of energy, life energy. And you know what? They're right. To the extent that you're plugged in and you're shining, you have charisma, you have luminosity, you have vitality. To the extent that you have vitality, they're right. You're one of the places where the power of being manifests. You're one of the places where the fountain of being bubbles. You get that? I mean, you got to feel your way into that. To the extent that you really get to be who you can be, you're going to be a place where the fountain of being is bubbling forth. It may even be spurting. It may even be, just filling up the rooms. But the folks that have figured out how to plug in internally will be idealizing you, and they'll be trying to, that's what the idealizing transference is. Idealizing projections are all about this. So what you've got to do, be generous. If you're strong, be generous, and try to, serve the needs of the sentient beings, as the Bodhisattva ideal says. But don't do so in such a way that you don't let them kill you. So, because they can kill you if you're inflated. And you've heard of burnout in therapists and clergy and spiritual directors and healers. Well, that comes not because they're hungry sentient beings, human and non-human, around. It's because they get inflated and they get to thinking they're the source. And so if you think you're the source, then you forget your spiritual practice. You forget to plug into your own fountain and be replenished so that you never let your energy get below a certain level. Okay, you had a question. One last question.
Yes. Given that you have a fountain,
Yes.
surgeon, bubble,
Mm-hmm.
and the vampires around that relationship, and I see it if we're talking about human relations, can't last, because if they're idealizing you, you can never
Well, it depends.
stay at that ideal
Right.
level.
Right. Well, let's put it this way. If transformation is possible in humans, then it is conceivable that if a person is related to in a human way, they may learn ways to connect to the energy without eating you. If I came to the conclusion that you were talking about there, I would not be an analyst, because I would be in despair about the possibilities of transformation. But one of the things any therapist has to learn is how to keep their energy from being depleted to terminal levels. So that is true in all relationships. There are going to be times when all of your relationships are going to have a lot of need for your energy. That is not demonic, that they have need for your energy. What is demonic is if you buy into a vision of your relationship where you are the source. You see? Do you understand what I'm saying there?
No, can you indulge me for another
Sure.
But we may not, I may not feel I'm the source. This is
Mhm.
that we don't turn out.
Mhm.
But the other party, the vampire,
May feel.
they feel it's the source.
Yeah, well, they do in an idealizing projection.
So if you're replenishing and no longer at that particular moment, that whole thing can crumble. I'm not talking
No, there's no question that that's not a stable place to stay. That's not a stable place to stay. But if you X out all the relationships where people are coming to you for energy, you're going to lose most of your friends. Think about it. And therefore, what I'm saying is it's not demonic to have somebody coming to you for energy. In fact, I want people to come to you for energy. The world is running on brownout. It's not all California. The whole world is browning out for lack of connection in a healthy way to this. So I want you to power up so that you don't have as much ambivalence about feeding. But if you're going to be able to do that, you have to be able to protect your self-identity. And in order to do that, you must regulate. You must not let somebody take more energy from you than you can spare. That's what we call boundaries. And that's what we say in codependency. You got to get to where you got a boundary, and you don't let the needs of the other person sink your boat. Now, I'm not minimizing how hard that is. I'm not minimizing that. You're right. Everything you're saying is right, except that the despair part. That is, you know what? It's up to you to set the boundary. Don't expect the other person to set the boundary. Never in any relationship. That is not their job. Friendship, marriage, love affairs, whatever. It is your job to set the boundary. That must not be relinquished to anyone else. And that's what having adequate self-identity means. And that's what having adequate individualization means. You know, if without adequate individualization, as he said, remember that polarity? You will not form enough of a boundary to keep your participation with the other from serving death. Does that make sense? And of course, this is an ongoing project, right? I mean, the good news is that you can learn to regulate this. That's possible. But regulation is not perfection. You're going to be regulated this weekend, but next week, you may give away too much. And then you're going to have to be awake. You can't go to sleep. You've got to stay awake. Say, well, I'm giving away too much now. And if I continue to do this, I'm going to hate that person that I love. So it's not kind to my partner to give them too much. If I give them too much, I'm going to hate them. And I'm going to be forced to blast away. Sorry about that. I'm going to be forced to blast away. You can see this in relationships all the time. A lot of relationship disorder is because people are not monitoring this consciously and realizing it's not the partner's fault. It's not the partner's fault. And we got to all understand, folks, we're all hungry. There's not any such thing as a non-hungry human being. And the question is, are we plugged up to the place where we can feed or not? I've got to stop for now. We'll come back. We're going to start as close to 1:30 as possible so we can finish this today. We'll go over all this again this afternoon in relationship to the transformation process. Thank you. Let's get started. We also have a full afternoon. Again, I would like to encourage you. It's what I always do with my students, my graduate students. It's important to remember not to approach this Tillichian material in a non-Tillichian way, because if you approach it in a non-existentialist way, then you won't get it at all, because it's essentially an existentialist philosophy. That is to say, you have to ask, how does this apply to me? And how does it apply to my struggle with being, to connect with being and resist the power of non-being, some of the Freudian tradition, some of the great thinkers in the Freudian tradition talk about is the death drive. I mean, they understand something that Tillich's pointing to. The Freudians in some ways better than Jungians, at least a lot of the time in our more superficial readings of Jung. The Freudian, the classical Freudians and the Lacanian Freudians have a sense that there's something trying to kill you. In you, there's something inside that's trying to push you over the edge of the abyss. And so when you read this stuff, or you listen to this stuff, or you study this stuff, you need to come at it existentially, or it'll just be a kind of a mental masturbation and metaphysical moonshine. You know, it's so what? But if you engage with this, if you got the courage to engage with it on the existential level, it will open your eyes to a lot of things. And you want to be asking. I'm gonna take a little time a little bit later, especially when we get into the last part this afternoon. I want you to be ready to dialogue some with a dialogue partner about where is the non-being coming at you. You know, you don't have to tell them everything about it, but you know, I mean, if we're real, I mean, you can have a sense about where you think it's coming at you, and what kind of anxiety seems most present consciously that we were talking about a while ago. You know, maybe none. It'd be great. There's none, say it. But what kind of courage do you think you've got some of, or what kind of courage do you think you need more of? And, you know, some people it's very clear they need one kind of courage. They've got the other kind. Other people have got both, and so they're not having a courage problem. That's wonderful. Or you may be having a problem with courage on both of them. It may be hard to be yourself, it may be hard to relate. And in which case, we got to find a way to plug you into the juice, get you some energy. So anyway, be thinking about that, and I won't ask you to say anything that will get you into any kind of toxic shame. But if there's something that you're aware of, if you think about this, that you can appropriately share. we try to be a learning community here at the Institute. Okay, now what we're going to do before the break is I'm going to focus on elements in the struggle for transformation. And as some of you requested, the obstacles for transformation. What are the obstacles in both Tillich and Jung? And the first thing I want to do is just give you my little shorthand summary of what are the elements of transformative process. And this would be true for individuals as well as organizations, cities, cultures, planet Earth. So these are the elements of transformative process. And I say that there are really fundamentally four of these. Of course, you know me, I always think in fours. That's part of my adept to Jung, you know, the quaternio. But the first thing you've got to have, and put all this under, you know, under the rubrics of increasing awareness, which is what both a great philosophical mind and a great psychoanalytic mind, regardless of the school of thought, is trying to increase our awareness in the service of life. So the first element, I believe, is what I call diagnosis or diagnostics. Some call it assessment. What is the situation here? You know, and it takes enormous effort, enormous drawing on what I call your archetype of the magician in your psyche. You know, you may be very good, and most people that are interested in Jung usually have a lot of magician in them, you know. But even if you've got a lot of this magician, you're really an analytical mind, and you really pride yourself on your awareness. Don't underestimate how much further you have to go. Because there is a kind of a Gnostic reality, a gnosis, a kind of deep knowing that is beyond the shallow understanding of any of the theories or anything. And you're wired for that. You have the capacity to have a deep knowing that opens, that gets you through the veil of enchantment and lets you see more clearly. Now, it's not pleasant to see more clearly. That's why we retreat into denial. In other words, it takes courage to be able to face what's happening. Face the dragon, I say in this manuscript I'm preparing. But this is a key element. It's a key element. And so you got to have a sense of what is wrong here. And that's why both from a psychoanalytic point of view or a philosophical point of view, you know, you use Tillich diagnostically to locate where the front is in your struggle for selfhood and for fulfillment. Because if you don't know where the actual front is, you can't send any resources there. So the first thing is to crank up the magician. And, you know, I've found that this is true, you know, even if you're really, really dysfunctional, you know, the place you can move first, it's got a lot to do with strategy and healing. If you're really, really feel like you're just about to drown in all of it, you're not going to be able to figure out where you want to go. Vision, I'll call it. You won't be able to do that. You're up to your rear end in alligators, and you can't keep your mind on draining the swamp. So don't try. Don't try to get the integrated vision at that point. You need courage to do all this, but you may not be in touch with any part of this warrior side of yourself yet. You may be terrified, in fear. You're not going to have a real good warrior right now. We want it on the line as soon as we can, but you're probably not going to have it. You need a lot of energy. So those are the elements. Diagnosis, vision for where you need to go, courage to take action to get there, and the energy to fuel the courage. When you really understand this, then you'll know why it's so hard to change. You understand these four things, you will understand why it's so hard to change. Each one of these plays a part. If you're really going to be moving toward your optimum transformation, you cannot neglect any of these four elements. Let me stay with the first one a minute. You've got to locate where you are, what's happening. And this is, I have learned through a lot of struggle with folks, that even if you're really struggling, the best place to move is into increasing the awareness of where am I, mapping. This is why I put so much energy in my work, in my lectures here at the Institute, about psychopathology, understanding the personal and archetypal dimensions of psychopathology. There are people that think, if you study psychopathology or you put so much emphasis on assessment, you're really not a humanist, or you're really crippling people or whatever. I understand where they're coming from, but that's very wrong-headed. Because a healer needs to know what's wrong. You don't treat all illnesses the same way. You need to know what's wrong. And so it's important to raise this awareness, get the awareness cranking. And there are lots of ways to do this. And this is one of the reasons we come to things like this, to hone our awareness. We know no matter how smart we are or how much we've studied, there's always something more to understand that might be liberating for us. So the first element is just diagnosis. What is going on? And in my teaching, I've tried to show in my lectures that are available here through the Institute that there's a shape of psychopathology. It is not a meaningless morass. It's patterned. And if you put some energy into studying it, you can figure out specifically what's going wrong with you and why. In other words, what is the weak link in my inner chains? There is a particular kind of place where your self begins to fragment. And it's not the same for everybody. But it's not completely protean. It's not completely all over the place. In my view, if you work in a tradition that's truly Jungian and hasn't thrown out Jung's fundamentals to chase after some other theoretical perspective, that there really is a shape of how we get in trouble. And you can see that Tillich thought that too. It's not all over the place. It's when we're about to lose, only when we're about to lose our fingernail grasp on our human reality that it looks like it's all the same. But it's not all the same. And so if we're going to help ourselves, if we're going to help other people, we have to help them have maps, psychic geographical maps. We have to map the way things go wrong. Like we were saying this morning, sometimes things are going wrong because you're putting too much emphasis on destiny. Sometimes things go wrong because you think you're more free than you are. Translate that grandiosity. And so on. All right, element 2. A vision. It's not enough to know what's wrong with you, because if you simply, this is the good part about why people are afraid of diagnosis, because too often psychological professionals don't really have a very sophisticated view of the possible human, as Gene Houston puts it. In fact, I would suggest to you that if you study the mental health delivery system in current psychiatry, they're getting dumber and dumber. It's embarrassing to me as a mental health professional. the lack of sophistication of contemporary psychiatry philosophically, or even psychologically. There's an incredible, well, let's put it in Tillich's terms. Contemporary psychiatry is making the mistake of totally privileging the destiny pole. Everything is simply your biochemistry, and it's all hereditary. Not anything you can really do about it. In fact, there's so little that you can do about it, I don't even have to talk to you more than 5 minutes when you come in with your problem. I just give you a pill. It's kind of a demonic sacrament. It's not that we don't need psychotropic drugs. We do. But if you have a view of the human, it's so inadequate that that's your view of cure. Somebody needs to help you with your grandiosity. Somebody needs to help you realize that when you're dealing with human beings, it's complicated. It's not that simple. You follow what I'm saying there? And so we need to realize that a lot of psychologies have a very inadequate view of the possible human. I would say almost all of them. And even, it's one of the things, even Jungians can learn something from some of these philosophers of human. That is, the possible human. I mean, there's a lot to be learned about that, even by folks that have learned from Jung. Okay, the third element. So you got to have a vision of where you want to go. If you're too preoccupied with what's wrong with you, you won't put enough energy into where you want to go. What's possible for you? When I look at someone, I'm interested in their psychopathology. I mean, that's, face it, I got a lot of magician in me. If it moves, I'm going to diagnose it. But it's not enough to be a magician. You got to be a healer. There's got to be an integrated shamanic kind of thing going on. So when I'm looking at somebody, I'm asking myself, where could this person go? What are their strengths? Where are they, using Tillich, where are they plugged into the power of being? If this person could plug into the power of being, what might be possible? So they look a lot different if you ask that question than if you're just focusing on the fact that they're X category. You follow that? So when you're looking at the potential optimum functioning of this person through a large view of the human, you can know what's wrong with them, and it won't get you that in despair about them. You follow me? You don't need a therapist that's in despair about you. Does that make sense? You know what the severe reality of this is? There are a lot of therapists that are in despair about themselves. And if they're in despair about themselves, what chance do you think they're going to have to see your potential? Yeah.
I think it's very Jungian to say, oh, I would just say that's a tragedy. It's actually in the Jungian.
Yeah, all mental health practitioners, we all struggle with this because, and this is where we'll get to this afternoon in terms of spiritual practice. It doesn't matter how good your theory is. In my view, in Jung's view, in Tillich's view, and in my view, a good psychological theory will teach you a lot about the plumbing. It won't hook you up to the water. In other words, psychological theories do not connect you to the power of being. They can do a lot of wonderful mapping. Some of us love these maps. Some of us create maps. But that's not energy. We'll come to that later. Okay. Courage to take a stand for your best self. The courage to be, very simply, Tillich makes it very clear in that courage to be, you got to really look carefully to get those sentences. There's not a wasted sentence in there. But what is courage? Well, Tillich assumes that there are all these things that are antagonistic to your really taking a stand in defense and advocacy for your best self. There are all these things Outer things we're going to talk about them in a minute. Outer things and inner things, which are trying to create chaos in your personality system, not serving your integration and your blossoming into the golden flower that Jung talked about. And why do you have, what is the role of courage? If you do not have courage, it's probably going to be hard for you to face the truth about yourself first. It's going to scare you to death to try to imagine an optimum future if you don't have courage. It'll feel totally overwhelming. Does that sound familiar? Think about it. When you think about what you might become, if you're a clinician, you notice that people will get overwhelmed if you lift up where they might actually get to. So in other words, if you're a therapist, you don't always tell the people you're working with what the possibilities where you see they might go. Because they may be at a place where if you were to share with them where they might get to, it may feel totally overwhelming and they may terminate. Especially if they're a dependent personality disorder. There are a lot of folks that have a lot of dependency issues. So even if you see a lot of possibility for a person, it's not necessarily a good idea to tell them. It's important for you to see it, though, if you're a helper, if you're a leader, if you're a helper. You gotta tell them when they've got enough courage to face it. Okay. Do you see the logic there? It takes a lot of courage to face what's wrong with you. It takes a lot more courage even to start imagining what you might become if you had the courage. It takes consistency in taking a stand against these things that are trying to kill you, or you won't get there. And the key, this fourth element, and I haven't always understood this. This has been, I've been learning a lot more about this in recent years and months. It's caused me, as I said earlier today, to take a new look at the theories of energy, of libido, the different libido theories from Freud on through Jung and so on. That is to say, have you noticed how many people know what's wrong with them, or at least they've got a good sense of problems they've got to work on? They've got a vision of where they might like to go. But they don't do it. And week after week goes by, session after session of therapy, month after month, year after year, and they don't move very far. Sometimes or at all. So the courage is a big issue. However, it's only recently that I've realized if you are experiencing a kind of a psycho-spiritual brownout, and somebody, your therapist or you, said, come on, let's get going toward your individuation. Let's confront this demon or this dragon. It's very interesting how often a person won't remember that during any of the time before the next analytical session. It's amazing. Next analytical session, you talked about it again, and something happens. They don't have any courage. So why? Why don't they have courage? Well, increasingly, it's become clear to me that if you think you're going to brown out now, if you're just running on empty, your fumes, in your gas tank, your energy gauge is saying empty, and then your therapist or your partner or whatever keeps saying, why are you so how wimpy you are? You don't do anything. The key is in the energy for a lot of people. if they are already feeling like they're browning out, they lack energy grids. What happens in energy grids? If you're getting there toward a real meltdown of the whole system because the energy is low, you don't take on new plants. You don't take on new suburbs. In Chicago, you start shutting down areas. That's what's been happening in California. You don't think about taking on new challenges, no matter how important they are. If there's not enough energy, if there's not enough, that is, and we've got to make this little caveat here, if there's not enough usable energy, for those of you who've got a lot of the lover archetype in you, you got loads of energy, but it's not manifesting in forms that are usable. And so this is the way this goes. You've got to have energy available, psychic energy, libido. After the break, we'll talk about spiritual energy. This is all related to Kundalini. This is all related to grace. This is all related to all those spiritual traditions, energy theories. And once you begin to connect those dots, things begin to make a lot more sense. So you got to have energy or you won't have courage. And if you don't have courage, you're not going to have knowledge. Somebody tell me why that is. If you don't have courage, you won't have adequate knowledge about what's wrong. Why?
Well, knowledge implies action.
Yeah, all right. You know, if there's something that's just getting ready to kill me, and I let myself know it, I'm not stupid. I know I'm going to have to fight it. And so you can understand the way denial works. If I don't have the energy that's accessible in an accessible form, I won't have courage. I won't have courage to take a stand for my best self. This is where Tillich and Jung go together. See, Jung always said, individuation is there. It's a human possibility. But he always said, most people will not individuate. Why? It's too hard. They give up. They give up. They give up on themselves. Very few places where Tillich and Jung are in such total agreement. They're in total agreement about this thing. Okay, so you got to have a certain amount of courage, or you won't even ask the right questions. It's a lot easier to think about what's wrong with all the people around you. And of course, beauty of that in terms of the seduction of it, you're usually right? You're not stupid. You know that there are really a lot of outer causes. Your partner's got these problems. Your organization's got those problems. Your boss has got these problems, and so on. And a lot of the time, those are less threatening things to see. It takes a lot less energy and a lot less courage to face other people's problems. Takes some. Denial, though, if you really lack energy and courage, you'll be in massive denial, and you'll be living in as Tillich called it, dreaming innocence, or as Jungians would say, unconscious, totally unconscious. Okay. So, and if you don't have energy to have courage, you will not face the challenge of thinking about what's possible for you. Really. And I put the vision of optimization for your selfhood. Optimization, that's my emphasis, because I think it's consistent with both Tillich and Jung. Optimization, not perfection. Optimization, what is realistically possible? Now, realistically, see, I don't mean that like a lot of people. That's why I put it in quotes. In terms of what is actually true about human existence, in other words. Go back to the first this morning. you're never going to completely actualize your essential selfhood in history. That's not what humans do. Humans are in touch with it intuitively, though, and it can be experienced as a regulating, inspirational vision, or it can be experienced as a crushing source of guilt and condemnation. Right? Does that make sense? But you're wired for it. But a realistic goal is something that would be attainable by humans, and in general, and in specific, somebody that has the particular realities of your destiny. In other words, a realistic goal is something that takes into account the destiny pole without giving it all the power to shut you down. Do you see what I mean there? That is to say, you know, if you have a tremendously traumatic personal history, you have to take that into account. You don't want to make it the tail that wags the dog, but you have to take account of that when you're deciding what you're going to go into, what you're going to do. So if you're a person who is working very hard to increase your membranes between you and the world so you don't feel everybody's pain all the time, then you may want to think twice before you become a psychotherapist. You follow that? A lot of folks don't take stock about what it is to be a healer. If you choose a healer role, what that practically means, you're going to be in the presence of a lot of non-being a lot of the time, not just yours. Do you follow me? So in other words, you take stock about what has been present in your destiny to get a realistic sense about, you know, where would I be at my best self? What expressions would give me a chance best chance to be my best self? Okay. Now, I said that in terms of my theory, many of you know it, could teach it. The magician function is involved in the diagnostics. In my theory, the royal function is involved in coming up with a vision for yourself. In other words, you have to ask the question, what selfhood am I going to build? It's a building project. And that takes a lot of courage. Because you know, if you're going to build something, it takes a lot of pizzazz to move toward it. But you got to have a blueprint for it. Okay. So we've got these 4 fundamental elements. And now let me just complexify a little bit more in terms of talking about the things that make it real necessary for you to have courage, those things that are inner and outer that are trying to kill you. You know, we talked about the active presence of non-being. And so in terms of obstacles to transformation, now clearly, anticipating our last session this afternoon, clearly a big obstacle to transformation is not being plugged into the energy. And closely behind it is being plugged into the energy so much that it's like drinking from a fire hose. So that's one big area of obstacles. Another area of obstacle is not having an adequate assessment of where I am fragmenting ontologically or psychologically. Another obstacle, not putting enough energy into my visioning process. Spending enough time, laying aside enough energy to invest that energy in futuring. Big obstacle, because finally, if you don't know where you want to go, it's awful hard to get there. Okay. So you get those obstacles, and the lack of courage. Doesn't matter what you know about where you want to go. Doesn't matter knowing what's What's wrong? If you do not have that courage to really take a stand day to day, every day, a number of times during the day, the amazing thing is how close to the ground you have to fly on this courage thing. It's like, it's not enough to get up in the morning and affirm your courage. You've got to affirm it, at 9:32 a.m. And then you got to affirm it again at about 10:13. And it's just like that. It's constant. And when you go to sleep, which is very easy to do, it's amazing. You just kind of go passive again. You just kind of go passive in the face of the things that are trying to kill you. And that's not a good strategy for healing, transformation. Okay. Now, in Jung's work, and in a lot of contemporary therapies, particularly depth psychologies, informed by the psychoanalytic tradition. I was going to start talking about the personal unconscious, but let me just emphasize this outer thing again first. This is very important for people who are psychologists and psychotherapists of all schools, any healers. If you don't look at the structural dimensions of chaos in society, then you won't really be understanding how many forces in this world are out to destroy the human that are not personal. That is, you've got to look at all of the forces of non-being on this planet today that are rapidly making it more and more difficult for human existence to thrive. And this is another thing. Psychoanalysts typically do not put enough energy into larger cultural dimensions of pathologizing, creating illness, toxicity for people. Margaret Shanahan and I are working on a new institute for psychoanalysis, culture, and spirituality, and we hope to bring the insights of the psychoanalytic traditions to bear, not just in terms of personal dysfunction, but to look at a lot of the structural, cultural things that are trying to destroy the human, and to use psychoanalysis to try to understand how all of those things influence the psyche. Let me just give you one concrete example. One of the things that is not studied enough of Tillich is his criticism of technology and the industrialization process. He's not a Luddite, somebody that wants to throw out technology and go back to the farm, so to speak. But he understands the forces. He calls them the forces of thingification. You've heard of treating people like commodities. There are enormous forces in the world today that are organized through massive power in the market systems of the world. And this is not, don't take this as an attack on capitalism. Don't reduce it to that. The socialists are not any better at avoiding thingification. In fact, some people can say they're a lot worse. But there are these massive forces to make people operate quietly, compliantly as cogs in machines. To make you think of yourself as less than a human being. And to think of yourself only as a consumer, only as somebody that doesn't rock the boat, only as somebody that does not point to any injustices. There are enormous forces, and they're not personal, and they're equal opportunity forces. They are present in every community, and so in other words, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that there's not somebody out to get you. Because there are a lot of things trying to destroy your environment and to make human beings not more conscious, less conscious. Madison Avenue advertising is a kind of a psycho-spiritual anesthesia, giving simple answers to incredibly complicated questions. You know what I mean. I don't have to belabor that. Okay, so those are outer forces, and Tillich would point a lot to that. I think Jungians need to learn from Tillich that there are a lot more reasons for lack of centered selfhood than just, unwillingness to learn Jungian psychology. There are a lot of things that are trying to make us forget psychology altogether. In fact, I hate to tell you, but psychology is under attack today. The practice of psychology. There are huge in economic forces that are trying to do away with psychotherapy and turn it all into neurophysiological medication. You follow me? I'm not making that up. That would fill up weeks of study. Many PhD dissertations could be done on that topic and not exhausted. So, but anyway, to the psychological task, this is very bad, because if you do away with depth psychology in general, or psychological reflection in particular, you do away with the very forces that are trying to get people conscious. And let's just start with the personal unconscious, because this would include all the dynamic therapies. That is, there are things in your personal unconscious that are trying to decenter your selfhood. In fact, they've already done it. Whether you call these things your lifestyle assumptions, as an Adlerian would call it, or your introjects, as an object relations theorist would call it, or your dysfunctional learnings, all sorts of different theories treated different ways. But there are residues in your personal unconscious. Jungians have a complex theory. You've got personal complexes that have a history. And those things are trying, remember the thing about self-identity, the challenge of self-identity that we talked about in Tillich? Complexes, to the extent that they are autonomous complexes and operating out of consciousness, those things are trying to decenter your selfhood. And of course, the more unconscious you are about them, the more practical forces of disintegration are present in your personality system. So you don't have to be a Jungian to understand that. That is widely understood and just talked about differently by many different psychological theories. And it's absolutely true. And Tillich studied this stuff. He was among the philosophers. He's probably the philosopher that studied psychology the most, and practical, existential aspects of psychology. And if you study his work, you'll see all this sophisticated understanding about how these personal aspects of forces of destruction in the personality operate. So there's that personal level. And we Jungians, we talk about them as autonomous complexes. And classical Jungians, and I would say people that really practice more as Jungians per se and not as so-called archetypal psychologists. Archetypal psychologists, in my view, you've heard me say before, I don't really think they're Jungian in the theoretical sense of the word. But to the extent that they focus on any kind of complex organization, then they would fit in this category too. In my work, I attend to that sort of thing. And what I'm trying to do now in my work is to Jungians always have said that at the core of every personal complex, there's an archetypal content. They've always taught all the analysts that. That's part of the Jungian dogma. At the core of your personal complexes, there's an archetypal content. Then they don't bother to tell you any more about that during the training. And that's because that's hard to figure that out. What I've spent most of my work on in recent years is focusing on the archetypal dimension of the forces that are trying to kill you. That is, the non-personal, not the non-personal outer forces, but the non-personal inner forces that, if you are not really conscious, and if you're not taking a stand with courage for your best selfhood, these archetypes in your personality, they're not that friendly. They invade you. And if you study my work, you'll see that There, in fact, you can look at this this brochure that we passed out. On the back, you've got my decoding of these archetypal territories. And if you study my lectures on psychopathology, the collective unconscious and psychopathology and the archetype compulsion and healing lectures, what I go into is the way in which different archetypes invade, try to colonize the person. And when you're not aware of what archetypes are the most imperialistic in your personality, you will often mistake an archetypal invasion for an expression of yourself. In my personal life, to give you an example, because of my family history and birth order and all that sort of thing, I was set up by my family system to take refuge in magician areas of the psyche, be smart. I was the one who was supposed to be smart. And it was okay for me to be smart. And I was reinforced for being smart. And so, in other words, the seduction of my spirit by the magician archetype, if you study my life and you study my family, it makes total sense. The only thing is that if you start trying to live in an archetype, you lose your human life. You go into your head. If you're going to the magician, you go into your head and you live up here over life. And you think everything can be solved by insights. Just knowing. You don't know it requires courage. Yeah, well, you have courage to think. But if you're possessed by an archetype, you don't have courage to think your way out of that archetype. You just think that's you. And it's not just true about, in my work, I try to show if you're possessed, if your life is being invaded by the lover archetype, you're going to have a lot of chaos in your life. There's not going to be a structure in your life. You're going to be, on the one hand, flooded with energy and then shut down into massive depression or addictive patterns. There's nothing wrong with the lover archetype, but when it invades you and you can't take a stand with courage against its invasion, it attacks your selfhood. It decenters you. It splits your personality. And so if you're a rageaholic person or a person that is acting out sadistically a lot with family members, really being cruel to family members, and I must say this is distributed between men and women. It's not just men that do this. There are a lot of abusing spouses, verbally abusive as well and physically abusive. And they are being invaded by the warrior archetype. And in their ego consciousness, they rationalize what they're doing. Well, you made me do it. If only you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have hit you. See, the ego is always going to rationalize. That's an ego defense. And when you're invaded by these archetypal structures, the ego always tries to rationalize why it's doing that. This is why I chose that. I chose to beat you up because blah, 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 blah. And the ego really believes it. That's the scary part. And so what I've been trying to do in my work is to show the extent to which, in addition to these personal complexes, we have to look at those archetypal energies that are coming into the personality and forming a psycho-spiritual aneurysm, a ballooning of the boundaries of the self, the little s self, or the ego. We are being invaded by archetypal contents. We don't know it. And if you got a dog, when you scratch a dog, that leg would just go. That's like the human ego. The archetype comes in, invades the personality, and the ego starts going, I'm the one causing this. So if you're going to get awake enough consciously from a depth psychological point of view, and with any Jungian worthy of the name, they're going to work with you on your autonomous complexes. And they're going to try to help you understand the way that complex is trying to decenter you and put you off the individuation path. And in my work, I'm trying to show you how not all those things that are trying to kill you are personal. Some of them are archetypal. And the task of a human being is to become more human, not to become an archetype. And so what does it take in the struggle for transformation? You need to understand where you're being invaded. How much of it is because of your personal traumas in the past, in your family, so on, cultural problems in your particular group you grew up in, and how much of it is because of what some of those experiences did, either in your family, birth order, or whatever, to open you to an archetypal invasion. And so look at the personal side, but also look at what is the impersonal, transpersonal, archetypal content that is causing you to fragment. And what I try to show people is it's not all over the place. It's not an infinite variety of these things. And what I try to do is take Milan's work, Theodore Milan's work, and the DSM-4, and show how you can go through these diagnostic categories and you can see what the invasion, the transpersonal, the impersonal archetypal contents are that are characteristic of different disorders. So, so in terms of psychological sophistication and looking at obstacles to transformation, we need to be aware of the outer historical, cultural, social things that are trying to kill people, so they don't get into a negative inflation and take total responsibility for all the things that have been trying to kill them, because there are a lot of impersonal things in the outer world that's trying to destroy their lives. We need to acknowledge that without doing what from this morning? We acknowledge the social forces that have been trying to destroy this person without doing what? Based on this morning, without encouraging what? Polar split. Yeah, without privileging the destiny too much. We have to be able to say to the person, yes, you're absolutely right. This has had a big influence on you. But now, our question today is, where is your wiggle room? Where is your freedom of action? Where are you free in ways you don't know you are? To take a stand for your selfhood. Does that make sense? Okay. So you deal with that outer dimension. It's important. Otherwise, you may lead a person to have too much guilt and condemnation. They may take responsibility that they don't have for a lot of the things that's happened to them. And that would not be healthy. And then you work at that personal complex level, look at that family system, look at the roots of those complexes and various traumatic experiences and so on. But again, therapists err on this kind of thing a lot. Say you were sexually abused as a child. Terrible experience. Or you were physically abused a lot. Traumatized, terribly traumatized. There is a tendency for everybody, those who have been the victims of that and their therapists, there is a tendency for them to err, as we said this morning, putting too much emphasis on that destiny. Because it is very, very destructive to constantly put emphasis on the horrible results of this trauma and not put adequate emphasis on freedom to grow, freedom to heal, freedom to change, freedom to find the strengths, freedom to go on, freedom to ritualize. I do a lot of stuff with the ritual process and the importance of grief rituals. To find people that can adequately ritualize with you. That's getting ahead of myself here. This is spirituality. But find people that can act that can ritualize with you an acknowledgement in community of the traumas you've expressed, so that it's not repressed or denied, but then be able to ritually let that go. Die to that. That's the initiatory process. And then be able to step into a new phase. So, and then We've already talked about the archetypal. So let me open it up here for a few minutes, and then we'll discuss a little bit, and we'll take a break. These are the elements of transformative process. You can see how they're interlocking. And you can see that no matter what the outer forces are, the destructiveness, no matter what the inner forces are, you need awareness of these things, but you won't have that if you don't have the courage. You won't let yourself know. And you need to have a vision of where you can go. But if you don't have the courage, you won't put any energy into that. And why won't you? Because the chances are the reason you don't have courage, for most people, not all, is that you don't have energy. And let me say this. I can eliminate the exceptions by saying you don't have connection to usable energy. Remember, those of you that have got a lot of lover energy, you got enough energy. If we could all just plug in to your lover energy, it would light us all up. But if you're structured with a lot of lover archetype influence, as compared to the other parts of your psyche, a lot of that energy, you won't be able to stand it. So you'll put it away. You'll dampen it down through a depression or an addiction, and it won't be usable. So if you have any questions about that, we'll engage about that. But the point of it is, the key is usable energy. If you have usable energy, you can have courage. In principle. You got to choose, though. You got to act. And if you're going to choose and you're going to act, you need to know where you want to go. Because if you don't know where you want to go, you're just going to sit there and race your motors. You won't know you won't put it in gear. So there we are. Let me open the floor now to engagement, and then we'll take a break. Yes, back here. Yes. 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 Yes.
Have the energy, give the faith, whatever issues there are, and actually have courage in order to make that happen. So develop the energy to develop spiritual practice.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. See, because you can be flooded with energy and not have a clue about spiritual practice, see. A lot of people are. And they just don't connect the dots because nobody's ever helped them to connect the dots. They don't know how lucky they are, for one thing. They don't know how lucky they are that all that energy is around. Because I know people that it's hard for them to feel sorry for manic people or real flamboyant lover types. Even though manic people have a lot of problems and real flamboyant lover types, they kind of have a lot of chaos. Interesting chaos, but it's chaos. You know, and it's like they don't know how lucky they are to have all this energy. But it's good news and the bad news. You know where the energy is. Nobody has to convince you that there's such a thing as libido. I can talk to them and say, "Hey, you got lots of energy." Yeah, I got lots of energy. See, they know it. But they never thought about what that's got to do with spirituality. In fact, they may think it doesn't have anything to do with it. They may think they got that because they don't have any spirituality. But that's where we have to help people by, having adequate theorization about this. And Tillich and Jung are almost on exactly the same place on this. It's like there are these primal generators. In Jung, it's the archetypal realm. The collective unconscious is loaded with energy. See, a lot of people talk about archetypes this, archetype that. But you know how you know whether something's an archetype or not? It's whether or not it's loaded with energy. If it's not loaded with energy, friends, it's not an archetype. There's not any wanderer archetype. Archetypes are loaded with energy, and they tend to do, that thing where they used to put iron filings on a piece of paper and put the magnet up under it. When there's energy there, in an archetypal form, it'll organize those filings in a certain way. And so the deal is, what we got to get to after the break is to start with the understanding that whether you call it libido and you just are talking psychology, and you got your psychology hat on, or you put your spirituality hat on and you talk about grace or kundalini or chi, phenomenologically, we're talking about the same thing. This is energy. And the interesting thing about it is, it's either flowing around or it's not. And when you got somebody that's depressed, really depressed, they are not accessing it in any usable way. We can play with the question of what's really going on down there in the unconscious. My theory, that is, it is so powerful that they're having to completely shut down the circuit in order not to be psychotic. See? In other words, if you really feel like you have absolutely no energy, it's probably real strong in you. And you're just lucky you have real good ego defenses, we call it. Your ego defenses are keeping the thing turned down so it doesn't blow you up. I'm going to get into that a lot when I teach this thing on psychic energy, because you start to study this stuff comparatively, you begin to see. You know, Jung said that you have to have the numinous to heal. Well, what's numinosity? It's sacred energy. It's power. It's a manifestation of sacred power. Boom. It's not a theory. This is where people misread Tillich. They thought he was talking abstractly. He's not talking abstractly at all. He said, from his point of view, hey, power of being is something. And I get with you, and it doesn't take me long. I know whether you got a lot of it or not too much of it. Why? Because you glow if you've got a lot of it. And you may be like the flame that moths fly into. You know, there are people that I know that they are like the flame, and the moths fly into them all the time, get burned up, get their wings burned up, you know, crash. But what fascinates me about this is, look at this. Numinosity is related to charisma, which is related to celebrity. Get that? Why is celebrity such a big deal in our culture? Well, it's because we've got so stupid about how to connect with the energy in more constructive ways. So people treat celebrities as energy sources. And through an idealizing projection, they try to connect with it through that. So this whole thing about energy, we'll talk about it more after the break, but both Tillich and Jung understand there's no shortage of energy. The question is, like I'll say after the break, what is spirituality? Well, it's finding the connection with the energy, and it's whatever you do to keep the energy from destroying you and everybody else around you. So you be thinking about that. How do you get connected to the energy? And what do you do to keep from being destructive to yourself and everybody around you? That's your spirituality. I don't care what you think it is. Spirituality is what is the truth about those two things. Are you connected to the energy? If so, I mean, if you're aware of it, if it's in your ego consciousness, then great. Then we say, where do you connect with it? And the answer may not be what your pastor would like to think, or your priest. But that is your connection. That is your sacrament. We'll get into that after the break. Wherever you connect with the energy is your sacrament. See, this whole theory of Tillich's is a sacramental philosophy. He thinks the energy is everywhere. You got eyes to see it. Yes, back here you had, I believe, Sammy, did you have your hand up?
Hi, Grace. Saying the connection with reality, specifically at grace and
Yes, grace. Well, see, I come out of one of the Protestant tribes in my family of origin. And, Protestants got they really prided the intellect. They really privileged the intellect, the history of Protestantism. In other words, what we know as systematic theology today is really, has really been nurtured a lot by Protestantism. In other words, Protestants depreciate the ritual systems. The ritual systems of Catholicism and Anglo-Catholicism and all those things. Those used to operate on a very different understanding of what grace is. Grace in the Roman Catholic tradition was not a concept, was not a theological idea. It was a reality. Either you are infused with it or you're not. And so the whole theory of the Mass, Jung was very fascinated with this. Look at his stuff in fact, I wanted to lecture today on transformation symbolism in the Mass. And I will address that some after the break. But the Mass is about energy flows. And it's not about an idea about energy flows. It's not the idea of the holy, the mistranslation of Rudolf Otto's title. It's not the idea of the holy, it is das Heilige. It is the holy. And so grace, in my view, rightly understood. I think that we Protestants are wrong about this. Wrong in what we've done with this. That is, grace is not an idea. It is energy. And the whole thing about the relationship between faith and works, it's related to this idea of can your ego provide the energy it needs for life? And the old Catholic tradition used to say, no. And Protestants agree with that. No, it cannot. So there are a lot of these arguments, but Protestants have so shifted this thing, the way they interpret, the way we think we got beyond symbolism and ritual and myth and all that sort of thing, and turned everything into kind of theory. And the real key is that grace is charisma. It is energy, usable energy. And the reason people gravitate toward folks with charisma, they know they need the energy. So they go wherever it's flowing. Other comments or questions before we take a break? Yes.
Celebrities have the energy of charisma. Or do you think that what they have is really other people's potential for connection? For example,
what was the first word to these? What? Oh, yes. Many of them actually have energy.
You don't think it's a lot of it is just because we present
Oh, it's that too. Yeah, let me comment on the dynamics of this. She's asking, well, now do these celebrities really have energy, or are they just feeding on our idealizations? Yeah, right. No, that's absolutely right. Well, see, this is the whole dynamics of which is fascinating to me. The dynamics of idealization in the way it works in human beings. Because if you're not connected enough to your own wonderfulness, you will experience your gold out there in other people, in idealizing projections. And say you are a rock star, and you're not just ordinary, you're really good. And so you're not idealizing other people. And you really get into where you think, you're the high priest of rock and roll. or the priestess, high priestess rock and roll, which is most of them that are successful, they really think they really identify with that. Now, it's bad enough if you're a rock star to deal with your own golden energies. Call that grandiose exhibitionistic libido. That's the technical $250 word for that. That's what makes you successful, because you don't have any problem in standing up here and manifesting. And that's what people love about you, because they can't do it. They can't stand up and manifest. But if you're a rock star, you can get out there and you're just as exhibitionistic as hell. You just love it. You can just let it all hang out, literally. I don't know whether you've seen some of those music videos. But then her point comes to the fair. See, I may be a sort of organized narcissistically in such a way that I can kind of keep from being crazy with that right at that point. But all this adulation coming from those that can't stand in their power. So I'm dealing not only with my grandiosity, I'm dealing with all my audience's grandiosity, which they can't deal with by themselves. They can't relate to their energy by themselves. They need me. So they load theirs onto me. That's another thing. In my Facing the Dragon book, I talk about this a lot. This is what happens. Most human beings, and see, this is where the individuation process is very important. Because unless you're claiming your gold, this afternoon we can say your divinity, unless you're claiming that piece of divinity, that little territory of divinity that you've been assigned to you, unless you are working with that and trying to make peace with that in a dynamic, creative way, you will unload that somewhere. You will, in fact, displace that. You won't be able to stand having it in here. It's a typical pattern. In fact, if you have an inferiority complex, you're doing it. You're unloading your own golden flower self onto something or someone else. And you got to ask, what is it? Where's it going? Because that's soul loss. That's shamanic soul loss. And that's not even the worst of it. That's bad. But what is even worse is what happens when people do that. Because what we do is we unload our grandiosity. I'm humble. It's just my religious group that's perfect and true and right and the only one. So we unload our grandiosity onto our religious group. We unload our grandiosity onto our race. We unload our grandiosity onto our nation. We unload our grandiosity onto our social class. Any place we can put it, we put it there because we can't stand how wonderful we really are. And the tragedy of that is just beyond words. Because what it does, it destroys the individual's chance for what we've been talking about. But it's worse than that. It creates Nazism. It creates the Inquisition. It creates global genocidal racism. Creates consumerism that destroys the planet. That is, the lack of attention to these spiritual development agendas create enormous evil. And so it's not just, in other words, this is classic Jung. If you don't face your individuation task, you're making the world a lot more evil place. And if you understand these dynamics, you can see that's not just Jung's fuzzy idea. There are actual clear dynamics that we can explain that cause that. Let me take one more question, and then let's stretch our legs, and then come back and we'll work on spirituality some more, because it's all related. Yeah.
Brief comment and a sort of nitty-gritty question.
Okay.
Your courage is flying close to the ground. I think that's sort of the deal breaker. It sounds like for Tillich, this is the comment, sort of learning. It sounds like for Tillich, courage has an opposite in grace. You're pointing that way. In the final analysis, courage can't stand on its own. It requires something else. But that's not my question.
Yes.
It can easily get seduced by big ideas. My question is this. You made the comment, I think resonates with lots of folks. Courage flies close to the ground.
Yes.
Is there good descriptions, insights in the clinical literature on encouragement from a Tillich point of view? Encouragement, obviously, is a mental process.
Yeah. Not as much as there should be. I tell you, the people that are the best at that are the Adlerians, because they always understood that psychopathology comes from discouragement. That's their whole rap. If you're messing up, if you're really messing up, it's because you are discouraged, and instead of facing your real life task of love, work, friendship, and a viable philosophy of life to live by, instead of facing the task of developing those life tasks, you don't have the courage you need to face them, so you go into sideshows. And you put all your energy into things that seem important, but they're not the real issue for you. And so the Adlerians have done a lot over the years on the encouragement techniques. And it's related to the whole idea of mentoring. It's related to what I talk about in my work is the royal agendas, the royal capacities. If you have a royal capacity in your psyche that's available, you will be able to effectively to mentor people and encourage them. You'll be able to bless them, in effect. Being encouraged is usually a result of being blessed by someone that you deem important. Blessing is blessing is always really low altitude too. It's always very concrete. It's very specific, and it sees the person in their individuality. Like, for example, in your world, a manager who isn't good at that is really harming the company, because the people that work for a manager, if that manager, when that manager looks at them, does not see them concretely, individually, and see their potential, and if that person is not able to make concrete comments which affirm and challenge in a creative way, then that person is not being as productive as they could be. There's enormous and growing evidence about this kind of thing, and that motivation is very hard to do. You can't just bring in a cheerleader, no matter how good the motivational speaker is, because it's too impersonal. Effective leadership is always very, very personal in certain ways. So anyway, let me go back to that first question, though, the first part of it. The relationship between courage and grace is not a polarity. It's more like the last thing you said. If you don't have connection with the energy, you will not have the courage. You can have energy without courage. You get that? You can have lots of energy without courage, because courage requires you to know what all that energy is for. And you've got to make a decision to take a stand. And so you can just be loaded. There are some really creative people that are loaded with energy, but they don't really have courage. And you can see this because so many creative people are self-destructive. That's just a fact. And what I'm just trying to help you understand today is why creative people are self-destructive. Because creative people are just awash in energy. And because of something about their particular structure and their personality, they are not like those of us that are not creative. They manage somehow to plug into enough of that and connect it to the turbines to get something done. Creative people get things done. But they're very good at rocking and rolling, but they are real bad at regulating. And that's why the ones that can't regulate don't last very long. Elvis. Rock and roll, no regulation. And who's that guitar player for the Stones? Keith Richards. Now, you may laugh at me, but I say, the proof's in the pudding. Keith Richards is still alive. And while he was flying awfully close in proximity to the flame, he is not dead. And that is the way you know. Let's put it this way: if he had been my analysand, he might not have been as famous. See, but I would have tried to help him regulate a little more optimally. But you see, it depends on your theory. See, does optimum regulation destroy creativity? I don't think so. I think that it makes you able to be creative more effectively longer. But optimizing your regulation, that is the spiritual challenge. And if you don't like spirituality, that's your psychodynamic challenge. Any other questions or comments before we take a break? A lot of stuff on the table here. Yes? Right. 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 Yes, they're functioning under the same archetype. She's asking for the tape. She's talking about the fact that in the old days, the clergy would come in the face of mental illness, and though they didn't have any dynamic understanding, at least shamanic people, shamans had more dynamic understanding. More recently, clergy have not had that. But you see, archetypal stuff works whether you understand it or not a lot of the time. And this is, for example, if you come from a Roman Catholic tradition and you're not just militantly hating the Catholic Church, if you're struggling with any form of chaos in your life, if you go to Mass a lot, it will make you saner. Period. The priest doesn't have to understand a thing about that. All the priest has to do is to be the mediator of archetypal symbolism in the Mass. And to the extent that you can access it, you talked about this, to the extent that you can access it, it will help you get centered. It will help contain your huge energies until you can, get more conscious. But what I like to point out is that healers operate under the magician archetype, the magus, the archetype of the magus. I've got another little manuscript that's a monograph, an old monograph that should have been published 10 years ago. It's going to be The Magician and the Analyst, the archetype of the magus in the occult, spirituality, and Jungian analysis. And what I do in that is to articulate the way in which all healers, whether they're, prophets, priests, clowns, so forth, shamans, they all operate under that archetype of the magician. The question is, how mature are they? If they are very immature, they're voyeuristic and they are not very invested in the healing of the person. If they're very mature, in what I like to call a shamanic maturity, then they're very invested in healing and they will fight for the person's healing. Let's take a stretch now and a break. Let's come back at no later than 3:15, and we'll focus on the more of the spiritual dynamics of this. Okay, we should get started now. Let me begin by just correcting an impression I may have given about this new book on the archetype of initiation. This came out, Sacred Space, Ritual Process, and Personal Transformation. This is a number of my lectures and essays over the years in which I look at the ritual dimensions of healing, both in spirituality and in analysis. And they tell me it will be in the bookstore. So you can order it through them. The other book that this is really reflections on my early research on this topic, and the book I mentioned, which is The Magician and the Analyst, which is a shorter monograph, but it contains all the technical, very tightly argued technical discussion of these things, particularly the role of the magician archetype in spiritual ritual and in transformation. It really goes with this book. It should be out in about probably 3 to 6 months. The Facing the Dragon book, which will be Facing the Dragon of Personal and Spiritual Grandiosity, is really an examination in a number of lectures on this great furnace, this great nuclear fusion furnace in our psyche, what you can call the archetypal self, or you can call it, like I have sometimes called it, the God self, or the great self within. It's my attempt to really connect a lot of recent theories about grandiosity in psychoanalytic theory, and to show how this dragon reality is real. In other words, none of you, in terms of our discussion today, none of you are without a generator in there. That's not really the problem of having one. There's a great dragon in there in the psyche, and the question is how to relate to that energy without having it kill you or other people, or without being so afraid of it that you just shut your connection with it down. And I addressed that in those Edinger workshops that are available now through tape, and these books are elaborations of that. Let's turn now to this question of the role of spirituality in transformation. And in this context, we're trying to keep this in a what I'd like to say a pan-tribal or a post-tribal context. And so I'm emphasizing Tillich, the philosopher, today, and Jung is the psychologist of the human, the most adequate psychologist of the human. And so we're not talking about a particular tribe appropriation of these things. What is clear from my research on this stuff over longer than I'd like to admit is that humans create spirituality to deal with the problems we're talking about today. That is, there's no such thing as a non-practical spirituality. To the extent that it is an authentic spirituality and not just a facade or persona religion, what I call persona religion in this book. Spiritual practice, authentic spiritual practice, is an attempt to connect with those energies that serve life, and to do so in such a way that they actually do serve life and don't turn demonic. And again, Tillich was fond of pointing out, and Jung in many ways pointed out, that these energies present themselves in lots of places, and they're not always the socially sanctioned places. And so you get a kind of what the great anthropologist Victor Turner, that I've done a lot of work with, what he calls the establishment structures point, what we would call the establishment's point of view on these things, and then you have what's really going on. You got the manifest and you got the latent going on. So in other words, when you're looking at anybody's spiritual ideas of spirituality, you can look at what they think they're doing, and then you look at what they're actually doing. And so as I said to you, one of the things that was made Tillich so controversial, he pointed out that religious forms can both connect you to the energy and they can get in the way of the energy. So Tillich pointed out that any religious symbol can both, for some people, connect them with the energy, with the power of being, the transformative power of being, or they can block the person's view of that energy. And so if you want to get some understanding of the ambivalence of religion or religious symbolism of all kinds, you study Tillich. He's probably got the most sophisticated analysis of all that that exists, in the sense of making it very clear that you can never tell in advance whether a symbol is being transformative or not. The proof is in the pudding. He uses, it's in the 3rd volume of his systematic theology. He talks about, you know them by their fruits. You know, it's like, you can tell whether a symbol is creative in a person's life, but whether it's creative in a person's life or not. Is it serving life? Is it serving love, hope, peace, joy, courage, justice? And if the symbol is being used to create hate, which many religious symbols are used for by different people, if it's creating anxiety unnecessarily, if it's creating despair about life and human existence, if it's creating a justification for injustice, for example, Christianity being used to support racism, which has been a historical reality, or that sort of thing. For in India, for example, spiritual symbolisms being used to support the caste system. See? But Tillich would simply say, he wouldn't say that you automatically know by choosing a tribe that that tribe is using symbolism creatively. He says it's not that simple. What you do is you look at a particular context and a particular person, organization, culture, whatever, religious institution, and you say, how is this person or organization's appropriation of symbolism serving the transformative power of being toward life? Not, or, you say, and how is its use of symbolism, or his or her use of symbolism, serving the power of death? Non-being. So Tillich would say that in every location, there's always this two-sided. Does that sound like Jung? Everything has a shadow side. There's no such thing as a right symbolism. It's right if it's serving creatively as a portal to the transformative powers of what Tillich calls the new being. See? Now, those of you who come out of the Christian tribes of various kinds, I mean, it would be interesting for you to pursue some of Tillich's reflections on that, because he's very hard on Christianity. He thinks that even the symbol Christ can be used in demonic ways. Every Christian symbol can be used in demonic ways. But you know, he's not picking on Christianity. He thinks that in every tribe, all of their symbols can be used in demonic ways. So there's a sense there that it's interesting. There's another place where he connects with Adler, the great Alfred Adler, because Adler always said, it's not what you believe, it's how you use it. And the way that Adler, I once wrote a paper on Adler's psychology of religion, and I pointed out in there that for Adler, you would examine the way a person uses the spirituality in their life and see whether it's encouraging their life and their treatment of others in a positive way or not. And that's the way you assess it, not the particular symbolic form. Okay, so in other words, Tillich, this is why Tillich, when he was alive and going around the country lecturing, he would fill up the houses everywhere he went, big, he had a response from ordinary people, just very similar to a rock star. He was really a celebrity. They could feel this energy in him, and he had very broken English. I mean, his English was not good, but people would come. They knew he knew something. He was kind of a portal for people, and this was a time when aggressive secularism was in some ways even more unchastised than it is now. There's a lot more interest in spirituality and spiritual life today than it was in the 50s in the United States. And that is in the intellectual circles and in the cultural elites of America. And Tillich pointed out that the divine manifests wherever it wants to. It's very much like Eliade. You've heard me lecture, many of you have heard me lecture on Eliade. They're very, right before Tillich's death, he and Eliade started working together down at the University of Chicago. And Eliade said right before his death that, Tillich said right before his death that if he had known Eliade earlier, his philosophical, his theological system would look very different, because he would have done a lot more work with other religions. He just got engaged with Buddhism late in his career, but that's sort of an accident of history. If you take the philosophy that Tillich that I've laid out for you today, Tillich spent a lot of his time analyzing Christianity, but his philosophy can be used to analyze Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanism, you name it, because it is this whole model that I've talked to you about. It's uncanny how close it is to Eliade's reading of the way the sacred manifests and what happens when it manifests. And I've put here two words which we're borrowing from Eliade. I talk about that in the Archetype of Initiation book. Hierophany, the manifestation of the sacred, and then something that people didn't emphasize as much when they were talking about Eliade, that any time the sacred is really manifest, it is a kratophany, K-R-A-T-O-P-H-A-N-Y. That is a manifestation of the power. So that is, if the sacred is manifest, it will manifest as a powerful expression of energy. Not power in terms of political power, although Tillich has a whole theory of all forms of power. But if it is a effective spirituality, it will have energy. Does this mean that all forms that have energy are necessarily helpful? No, not necessarily. You can think particularly, you may have studied, as I have, a lot of the different, all the permutations of religious practice. And, for example, there are people that get really fascinated with evil. And it becomes very attractive. You see some of this, and you see this characterized sometime in the movies, and there's a lot of reality to it. People that get really fascinated by evil. One young man said, they asked him why he was into Satan worship. He said, well, I want to be on the winning side. And you see, you get that? Now see, that's about, you look at who's got the power, who has the energy. Well, they note young people are not stupid. They may be uninformed, but they're not stupid. And they look around and they say, in our world today, who's got the most energy and who's got the most obvious power? And young people look and they see in a lot of communities, who's got the power? Drug dealers. Who's got the economic power? And so there can be manifestations of mana in circles and through powerful priesthoods. I'm putting quotes around that, folks, on the tape. That do not really have the well-being of people as their first priority. One example of this is Madison Avenue in marketing. There's a lot of money and research going into a kind of advertising priesthood. And if you study how elegant commercials are in our culture, you understand that these people know about libido and energy flow, and they have a sense about how to appeal to people's primordial needs and to try to use symbolism to exploit that. And so those are forms of spiritualities, and Tillich today would and did analyze those things. Technology today manifests a lot of energy, a lot of power. And Tillich pointed out that it's very tempting today to turn to that uncritically and to avoid the kind of in-depth understanding of the spiritual life that we've been talking about today. But at the very least, if it's an actual spiritual practice worthy of the name, there is a connection with energy. Then the question is discernment. How do you tell whether this thing is demonic, very destructive or not? It's interesting. In Tillich's thought, we'll start with one thing here. He saw evaluation of people's spiritual situation on a continuum. We've already addressed this a little bit this morning, between two poles. That is, the pole of profanization, that is, becoming more profane experientially, and he didn't mean that like dirty words, he meant lacking in energy. Profanization is brownout. And demonic, the way he used it, as a part of his assessment of spiritual practice, demonic, in a sense, both of these are demonic in the way you and I might use the word in a larger sense. They are not, they're problematic. Both expressions are problematic. So you may be having problems in your life, in your spirituality, because you're having brownout. That's profanization. Or your church may be experiencing profanization. There may be no energy in your congregation. Your pastor or priest or rabbi or imam may not have any ritual genius. And so the rituals and the prayers and everything may seem like dry bones when they do it. That would be profanization. In Tillich's sense, the demonic is when the things are glowing white hot and the person is really plugged into the juice and they're really experiencing the contact with the 220,000 volts of spiritual energy. This, he would talk about, the danger of this is what he would call demonization. And demonization occurs when the energy is so strong that it overwhelms the person's capacity to regulate it. And it starts breaking the structures of their personality and their life. You can think psychotic break. Why is it that intense religious experience often is associated with psychotic breaks? That's the reason. It's a demonization, yes.
So, just in what you just said about, I guess, with the shaman or somebody who goes into these psychotic breaks, that point, and then the point about just previous to that about the demonic level of energy.
Yeah.
brings me to something puzzling in Joseph Campbell, some recorded lectures he did, where it was hard to tell whether he was saying like, okay, this tribe does this where they're going to actually destroy some people. And at first it seems like he's saying, well, this is a problem because these people get destroyed. Then he seems to be saying, well, no, this is essential to tap into these levels of energies, and you wouldn't want to give it up.
Yeah.
And similarly, it was hard to tell, well, is the shaman, is there a problem of a person becoming psychotic, or it's not a problem because that leads them into some realm that would get...
Yeah, see, this is very complicated here. The question he's raising is very complicated. One, it's like if somebody's undergoing a shamanic initiation, do they become psychotic, or is that different from psychosis? Or if they are psychotic, would it be all right? Or in a tribe, they need to have their war dance. I don't know whether you've been watching that. Did you see the movie about the guy that went to visit the cannibals? What's the name of that? Somebody? Yeah, something about keep the river on your right. If you get a chance to see that, it's this incredible movie, and it's related to these things. This guy, this anthropologist, goes upriver to visit some headhunters, and he kind of goes native because there's so much juice in the tribe. And he finds himself on a raid of a neighboring village and participating in cannibalism. And so this would be an example of plugging into this primordial energy in a tribal form, and then being overwhelmed by it before you know what's going on. Very fascinating man. You have to look at that movie. But in any case, that's very complicated. The truth about the experience of shamans, healers, indigenous healers in any tribe is that, there are people that romanticize it from both ends. Some people want to make them expressions of psychopathology and schizophrenia. Usually that is not the case. The ones that fail their initiation and die, they're usually, they're the ones that could not make it through the heat. This thing about the mystical heat is a big thing in all spiritual traditions. And it's only if you're kind of on the outside of the spiritual tradition that you don't know much about spiritual heat. But if you get in the depths of the spiritual tradition, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, shamanism, African religion, there's always this reality of the spiritual heat, which is this form of energy that we're talking about. While a shaman that makes it to be an authentic shaman, and there are many of them, goes through terrible ordeals, and many of them, and a lot of the initiations died during the process, and so they didn't become shamans. But just because they didn't become psychotic or were not killed during the process, to be a shaman, you have to fly so close to transpersonal energies in the course of your vocation that it's never safe. It's never, ever safe to be a shaman. You get to know a shaman intimately, and I've had the privilege of knowing some very close friends. And they will tell you up front it's very dangerous being a shaman. And they have to be very careful. And they have to work very hard in their practice to have containment and channeling of their energy, and what some of the occultists that I studied would call psychic self-defense. They have to do a lot of self-defense, spiritual self-defense, because if you're a shaman in a tribal culture, you got a lot of people that hate you because of your power, and who are very, and because certain shamans do get demonic and go very bad. There are people with shamanic initiations who get inflated and lose their capacity to be ethical. It's very tempting. See, that's the bad part about getting plugged into the energy, because when you get plugged into the energy, the tendency toward becoming what Jung called inflated is very, very close by. And so that's the more complicated thing. See, so in spirituality, whether it's shamanic or Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, you got to plug into the energy, but you've also got to regulate. You've really got to work on the regulation. And because the danger, if you're really plugged in, is always that you're going to get over here. If you're plugged in, your problem will not be profanization. If you're a clergy person, or in some ways a therapist too, that is, and it starts becoming ordinary for you to do therapy, it starts becoming ordinary for you to be a minister, then you're in danger of profanization, because you'll start going through the motions and your soul is not in it. Follow that? But if you're really plugged into the energy, that will not be your problem. That will be your problem. And so, and the grandiosity, that's what I've been spending so much time working on. It is so seductive. And it sneaks up on you from behind. So when you're the most in danger of being inflated and being out of control, you don't know it's happening. See, that's what we like to think. We like to think that people that are getting grandiose know they're grandiose. But it's almost never so. It's almost never so. So those are the two key issues. Now, so you think about it when I have you turn to your neighbor now and do some discussion for a few minutes. Is your problem profanization? Have you had to struggle to get connected to the energy? If you are connected and you're aware of being connected to life energy, is it coming through a religious form? Or is it coming through art? Or is it coming through a person? Or is it coming through a celebrity? Where is the energy manifesting in your life? If it's not apparent to you, then you've kind of got it shut down. Doesn't mean you don't have it in you or you're not connected to it internally. You got to look at Edinger's book. You're just in that alienated place right now. You got to ask yourself where you need to drill, to get to it. Or do you have more energy and you know what to do with? And if that's the case, how do you experience it in your own experience? And so I've given you a lot of things that you can address in these few moments we're going to take now. Are you aware of which kind of anxiety you experience the most? You share that. Are you aware of which courage you have and which courage you need more of? We can share that. Are you connecting with power of being? If so, is it in a religious form or is it in the arts? Or is it in your vocation? Or is it in your relationships? Because Tillich has a sacramental view of reality. The point is, wherever it really manifests, that's where it manifests. It may not have a religious name on it. And so let's find someone to dialogue with for a few minutes, and then I'll call you back together in just a very few minutes. Let's come back together now for a minute. I'll stick around and we can chat a little bit after we let people go, but I'm going to open it up just a minute. But I'm not going to have time to go into all the ins and outs of containers. A lot about that is in this Archetype of Initiation book. Let me just give you a shorthand. It takes ritual process relating to prayer, highly developed participation in mythic symbols and rituals of a variety of kinds, both to connect with these energies. You need symbols for the reason they are a means of connecting to this energy. If you use something like an ideology, like some particular political ideology or some psychological theory to connect with these energies, you're using that theory in a kind of a symbolic way. It's you got to realize that everything becomes symbolic to some people, and they use it sacramentally. So Tillich pointed out that just because somebody is using the Republican Party, as a religious form, doesn't mean it's not religious. That is religious. It becomes religious at the existential level. It may be demonic, or it may be, to some of us, profane. But the point of it is that anything can become a symbol existentially for people. And that's another place you study Eliade's patterns in comparative religion to get a sense for that. Anything can become an occasion for the manifestation of the sacred and its power. Doesn't have to be a religious symbol. It becomes a religious symbol when it is a manifestation, when it's a vehicle, when it's sacramental. If it becomes sacramental to a person, that is mediating energy, it has become sacramental. It has become religious by virtue of the fact that it mediated the energy. So, but to get really conscious, which is the theme for our day, to really get conscious about this, you gotta think about, well, what am I using symbolically to connect with energy? Or what could I be using symbolically to connect with energy if I'm low on energy, if I've got brownout? And all the stuff about ritual process and the practice of spirituality is really related to these things. And there are a lot of resources for this now. A lot of people are doing creative ritualization. Women are doing it in women's groups. Men are doing it in men's groups. Believe it or not, I've even got some folks that are going to be rabbis, priests, and clergy who are learning how to use symbols. Fancy that. And increasingly, even though they're not Jungians, you'd think they were all Jungians now. Jungians forever have been trying to talk about the spiritual dimension of psychology and getting ridiculed for it, but now everybody wants to get in on the act, which is fine. We welcome that. Every little professional school of psychology's got a course in spirituality and psychotherapy, right? That's a good development. We just hope that they'll realize how complicated this is and that other people have been studying this stuff earlier and they might want to learn from it. So anyway, look at all the work that's being done now in prayer. That is a form of this. If you really want to plug into the energy, learn how to pray. It doesn't just come from Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, tribal peoples. They pray all the time. They knew something. That is, it helps to connect with the energy if you express the fact that you need it. So, in Christian traditions, they talk about this as the means of grace. Attending worship, spiritual studies, prayer, participation in liturgy, and so on. Each tribe has got resources on this. One of the nice things that's happening now is that the spiritual tribes are finding new ways to cooperate. Like there's this wonderful dialogue going on now between Christians and Buddhists all over the world. And as I said to you earlier, in terms of this Tillich thing, there's a lot of capacity to interpret Buddhism through Tillich. hasn't much, very little of that's been done, but it's possible, and so on. So in other words, you got to look at some of the resources. You can look at some of these new books of mine that point to these things. But there's a rich thicket of resources for spiritual practice out there. Question is, are you consciously trying to find what's appropriate for you, and then have enough energy to have the courage to do the study and to actually put some of it in action, so that you can start having this problem that I would like you all to have, figuring out how to regulate all that energy you got. So if you don't already have that problem, I look forward to the day when you have it. And I'll celebrate that you've got this problem of having too much energy, and then we'll try to figure out ways to help you channel it. Now, let me open the floor up. We're just about out of time, but if let's take at least 5 minutes, and then I'll let everybody go, and then I'll stick around a few minutes to talk. Yes, back here. Things that came to you in your reflections.
I had a question about your chart.
Okay. Then I want to hear from you some of your reflections about what we've talked about.
As I look at that, are those red lines that are on there, is that related to that the same way as it was earlier today?
No. That, Tillich would want you to understand that, that ground of being is always there, and it's always oozing the power of being. And it has, that at its core is an intentionality about being transformative power for rejuvenation. And so it's good that it stayed there, because that's very Tillichian. It's also very Jungian, because if you look at all this Jungian appropriation of symbolism, a Jungian will look at every religion and they'll find the fountain. They'll find the center. And it represents the archetypal self, and its energy is trying to come up to serve the ego. So look at Edinger on that. But no, it doesn't erase. I think they got one of those. I think they got one of those permanent markers. Okay, what came to your mind as you started thinking about this stuff about your own spiritual life or your own experiences? Anything that you can share without going into toxic shame? Anybody? Yes.
The shame thing doesn't happen, but I'm recently been looking at my own life, and the energy thing you talk about is very interesting, because I tend to take on, I guess, more than I should on some levels, but there's always been this burning thing about being a painter or an artist and having something to say, which I do, but not enough. I actually came here today because I was looking for just a jump start for my brain.
Yeah.
I just spent time with it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very, probably a lot of us in here, if we would be honest, we've experienced that too. And what you got to realize, there's always this profanization thing. It doesn't rest. You got to understand that staying in touch with the flame, you got to be awake to do that. Most people. Now, some of you, it's just all around you, and you couldn't lose it if you tried. But most of us don't have that. Most of us, we connect with it, and then it starts to sediment. And literary critics say the sedimentation, it starts to get ordinary. We start losing that special energy. And so this is a very, very common thing. And this is one, and listen, the bad news is, so you're a young guy. As you get older, it gets worse. And so I say to people, look, one thing that's important about it, you need to know about the aging process. You need to work on this spirituality thing now and really build on a foundation so that when the forces of death start climbing and start breathing down your neck, so that the despair, the temptation and the seduction of despair, that you don't just kind of embrace that. And the key, and I work with folks, folks that have many years, and I love it because it is not necessary to lose the fire as you get older. But you can't keep in touch with the fire if you're not awake. You have to, propane torches, many of you are not initiated into propane torches, but you have to adjust that flame. It'll burn very yellow if it's not adjusted right. Think of James Hillman's book, A Blue Flame, You adjust your spirituality. It's got to be tuned, folks. You've got to really tune your spiritual life. And to do that, you've got to attend to it every day. You've got to attend to it, hopefully, the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. And as much as possible during the day, like the indigenous peoples of the earth all did. They didn't pray once or twice a day. They practiced the presence of the spirit world all the time. And in order to, as you start aging, which we all are, you've got to really build your foundation and in terms of how do you stay close to the flame. Because you can do it. It can be done. I know people that do it. I know people of advanced years who I have to worry about them being too close to the flame. And that's exciting to me. That's very exciting to me. And so, but now's the time to start. There's no better time to start tuning that flame in you than now. And because if you do tune your spiritual fires, you work with trying to regulate, learning how to access and regulate, and fight dirty. What works is what works. Then you will have the energy you need to have the courage you need to face the truths you need to face, the dragons you need to face, and to imagine a vision for the next stretch of your pilgrimage, your journey. And you will have the courage to take action and take a stand in the transformation, the continuing transformation of your best self, because it is, somebody said earlier, this just goes on and on. It does. Initiation is not something that stops. Initiatory process is another word for individuation. And the good news is that fire is available to you. It is there. And the reason we talk about spirituality is not just because it's a fad today. It's a fad. But the truth is, our forebears all got it. They all knew. And you see it in Victor Turner's work, Eliade's work, all kinds of people's work, Tillich's work. Spirituality has always been about locating the power with a capital P. The power without which human beings cannot have the energy they need to serve life in all its forms. So let me just close with that. I want to thank all of you for coming today. It warms my heart to have people interested in this topic. And let me encourage you to don't let yourself be daunted by the difficulty of studying Tillich, his books, because there really is a pony in there if you'll just keep digging. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.